In her final moments on Earth, Cheon Yongpi found herself on the cold ground, feeling the poison given to her as a treacherous gesture by her best friend Gyuan, ruthlessly destroying her heart. This act of betrayal was a double blow to her, for Gavin, a man she had considered close and trusted, had turned into the perpetrator of her demise. Under the weight of unbearable pain and a sense of betrayal, she tried to unravel what had caused his decision. Her gaze, perhaps for the last time, intercepted the silhouette of Gavin as he slowly left the cave, leaving behind only the echo of his footsteps and the shadow of unspeakable sadness reflected in the tears streaming down his cheeks. Whether these tears were the result of the pain of the deed he had committed or a manifestation of sincere betrayal remains unknown. At this moment, Cheon Yongpi was bleeding and her soul seemed ready to leave this world. But suddenly, as the last breath escaped her lips and the darkness seemed ready to swallow her essence, something unexpected happened. Instead of the expected transition to the next world, Cheon Yongpi felt a sudden rush of new life. Her spirit, as if refusing to accept the end, found refuge in a new body, beginning another chapter of her existence. When she came to, she found herself surrounded by a group of anxious servants whose faces expressed a mixture of surprise and relief at the sight of her sudden awakening. These servants, witnesses to her extraordinary rebirth, now turned out to be the first faces Cheon Yongpi saw as she entered a new life full of secrets and unforeseen twists of fate. Rebirth in a new guise promised new challenges and perhaps gave her a second chance to uncover the secrets of betrayal and find the truth behind the fog of past events. Suddenly, one of the maids, overcoming the initial confusion, walked over to Cheon Yongpi and hugged her, treating her with the tenderness and respect befitting a lady. This action and the maid's words caused Cheon Yongpi to burst out in bewilderment and sharp reactions, for she absolutely could not understand what this woman was talking about. Her voice, filled with surprise and indignation, sounded so unexpected to those present that it left them in a state of deep shock. Their faces reflected incomprehension. How could their mistress not recognize them and act as if she were seeing them for the first time? The servants, one by one, began to introduce themselves, hoping to dispel her embarrassment and remind her of herself, recalling moments they hoped would be familiar to Nyeonpi. To her, however, their faces remained strangers and their names nothing more than empty sound. The situation was tried to be clarified by the healer, who explained with sad seriousness that the mistress had allegedly tried to eat the fruit of a bitter dragon, which was the cause of her death. There was something unbelievable in that statement, as Cheon Yongpi was known as an undefeated martial artist whose name was known and respected in Marima. He also added that apparently Mrs. had lost her memory, which explained her reaction. Another unexpected circumstance added to the confusion. Suddenly the maids, as if in agreement among themselves, announced that she was now a concubine. This discovery was so shocking that the world in which Cheon Yongpi was a consummate martial artist now seemed distant and unreal to her. She, the greatest warrior whose exploits were described in legends, had now become the emperor's concubine. This new position in society was as unexpected as it was unfathomable to her, as her past life and accomplishments seemed erased by a single accident. From now on, she had to make sense of her new existence and her place in a world that seemed so foreign and incomprehensible to her. Now she has nothing to do with her old life and will be forced to live as the emperor's concubine, in peace and tranquility, without the risk of being once again betrayed. On the border between realities where fates intertwine in unexpected patterns, Cheon Yongpi, an accomplished martial artist, found herself in an unusual position. She stood in the midst of a dense forest, where each blow on a tree was not just a physical action, but a reflection of the turbulent thoughts that filled her mind. Her thoughts were wrapped in memories of Gavin, whose betrayal had caused her pain and bewilderment. Time seemed to stand still. The world around her was frozen, waiting for the outcome, and in this confusion, a whole month had passed since Nyongpi had stepped into her new life as a concubine, and from that moment on, she had been called Cheon Seoyo. In this new reality where fate had given her a chance at a second birth, Soyo and Nyonpi, despite sharing a common essence, had little in common. They shared only a family name and the memory of how the poisoned fruit was the beginning of their rebirth. The body that Nyonpi now possessed seemed too frail and unaccustomed for someone used to brutal fights and strenuous training. However, despite her physical frailty, Nyonpi appreciated this new role in her own way. Becoming a concubine opened other horizons for her, where every day didn't require risking her life on the battlefield. It was not just a continuation of her journey, but an opportunity to rethink her own beliefs and priorities in life. In the silence, broken only by the sound of the wind hitting the leaves, Nyanpi, or now Soyo, tried to find answers to the questions that troubled her. This new world, full of mysteries and unfamiliar challenges, required her to adapt and find a new place in it. Despite her physical weakness and lack of her usual control over the situation, she felt that her spirit and will to win remained unshaken. It was these qualities that allowed her not only to survive in her new circumstances, but also to find ways to fulfill herself within her given role. The sudden rustle that cut through the silence of the secluded clearing where Cheon Seoyo was practicing instantly put her on high alert. Her reaction was lightning fast and precise. Her foot rushed towards the source of the sound, but at the last moment it froze in midair. The reason for this sudden stop was the young man standing in front of her, who, to Soyo's surprise, didn't even try to defend himself or fend off the blow. This moment of unbelievability made her lose her balance and she almost fell, but was saved in time by the stranger's outstretched hand. The young man helped Soyo to his feet and introduced himself as Hap with surprise in his voice. His genuine surprise at her not recognizing him caused some embarrassment in Soyo's soul. She was still getting used to this new world, where every encounter could mean either a new ally or a new threat. Suddenly, her attention was distracted by voices coming from far away. At that moment, realizing that her former strength had left her, and not wanting to take any chances in an unknown situation, Soyu made the decision to run away. She left Hap standing alone, not even bothering to say her name. This decision to run away without introducing herself was a moment of realization for Soyo about her current limitations. In this new life, where every action and every choice had consequences, she was forced to take a fresh look at her abilities and take precautions to keep herself safe. As she walked away from Hap and the unknown danger lurking in the voices beneath the forest canopy, Soyo realized that her path in this world would be full of challenges and that each step forward would require both new knowledge and caution. At an audience with the Empress, Cheon Seoyo became acutely aware of her position as an outcast in the palace. This feeling was reinforced after noticing that the nobles and servants avoided contact with her, probably due to the recent poisoning of the original Soyu. In this confined atmosphere of palace intrigue and rumors, Soyo felt like a lonely island in a churning sea of whispers and secrets. Amidst the endless stream of rumors and whispers, a piece of news that piqued her particular interest reached Soyu. It was said that General Hap, with whom she had recently had an unexpected meeting, had yet again failed in another wedding. Remembering his soft facial features, Soyu involuntarily thought about him, his smarmy face, and what circumstances might have thwarted his marriage aspirations. Suddenly, her musings were interrupted by an incident that happened right in front of her eyes. One of the concubines trying to stand up suddenly fell down as if someone invisible had pushed her. This moment took everyone by surprise, and a tense silence enveloped the hall. At this decisive moment, when everyone's eyes were fixed on the unfortunate concubine on the floor, the emperor himself entered the hall. The emperor's appearance at such a tense moment only added weight to what was happening. Everyone present, including Soyo, felt the influence of his authority. His sudden arrival seemed like an omen, and there was uncertainty in the air as to how events would unfold next. For Soyo, who was at the crossroads of her reflections and observations, this moment was another test in her new life full of unpredictability and mystery. The emperor, like a shadow, spoke imperiously to the concubines gathered around him. His voice, full of displeasure and anger, cut through the darkness as he firmly demanded to know who was present who dared to wander through the Cheon forest under the cover of night. The moment of tension reached its climax when one of the concubines, already lying on the ground, ventured to meet his gaze. With pride and indomitable spirit, she declared that she was the one who dared to roam the forest in the night. The emperor, decisively interrupting the dead silence, took her with him, separating her from the herd of foxes, as he put it, suggesting that her fall was not an accident, but rather a challenge that left Soyo puzzled. Soyo, however, did not let herself be discouraged. Night was a time of freedom and strength for her, when she could hone her skills in the shadows of the forest, far from the eyes and ears of the palace. She practiced enthusiastically, feeling joy at the unexpected compliment she had received earlier from the emperor, who had called her a fox. For Soyo, it was much better than the previous nickname she had been rewarded with up to that point. Suddenly, however, her attention was drawn to the figures in the darkness. It was the emperor and that concubine, and they were clearly shocked to see Soyo in such an unexpected place. The situation escalated when Soyo realized that she was the object of the emperor's search that day. However, instead of confessing, the emperor decided that Soyo was only trying to steal his attention and expressed this assumption to the concubine standing next to him. These words caused a wave of irritation in Soyu's heart, but her attention was diverted by Hap's sudden appearance. His sudden appearance added a new twist to an already tense atmosphere, foreshadowing new challenges and opportunities for developments in this complex story of palace intrigue and secret passions. In an unexpected turn of events, with the dark veil of night still shrouding the Qian forest with its mystical cover, the emperor discovered that their secret conversation had not gone unnoticed. His gaze, as sharp and penetrating as a sword blade, instantly registered the presence of the unexpected listeners. At this critical moment, Hap, who had barely had time to realize what had happened, found that Seoyu had already disappeared into the night like a ghost, vanishing into the darkness without leaving behind a trace. The arrival of a new morning brought with it not only freshness and new possibilities, but also the anxieties of the previous night. So-Yeo, pondering the events, remembered the rice cake that Hap had given her the night before. Her thoughts swirled around that gesture. There was only one time in her life when she was given food for nothing, and that episode ended in her death. So she couldn't help but look for a catch in this seemingly innocuous gesture. In an attempt to unravel the mysteries surrounding her, Soyo turned to the maids in an effort to learn the meaning of such a gift. From the servant's words, she learned that handing food could be considered a show of sympathy, but only if the food did not contain poison. This discovery made her think deeply about Hap's true intentions and what kind of feelings he was trying to express in such an unusual way, especially given their complex and tangled relationship amidst palace intrigue and conspiracies. While Soyu shared her thoughts on the rice cake given by Hap, the maids surrounding her couldn't hide their excitement. Their eyes glowed with curiosity and anticipation, eager to learn every detail of this unexpected bounty. But their heated discussion was interrupted by the appearance of Concubine Wu, whose arrival brought tension to the previously joyous atmosphere. Concubine Wu, whose sudden need for help had puzzled everyone present, revealed the reason for her concern. It turned out that the emperor, in his continuous quest for fun and novelty, had taken notice of her, but only because of a mix-up confusing Wu with Soyo. This mistake caused Wu not only embarrassment, but also fear of losing his quiet life in the shadows, for the emperor's attention could bring as many problems as it did privileges. Wu looked to Soyu for answers. She wanted to understand what it was about Soyo that could have attracted the emperor so much, hoping that once she understood it, she could somehow manipulate the situation to her advantage, or at least avoid unnecessary attention. But Soyu, not wanting to lose her quiet life and wanting to avoid the emperor's attention, suddenly started swinging her fists. This unexpected gesture, accompanied by a broad smile, brought confusion to the conversation. By swinging her fists, Soyu not only startled Wu but also unexpectedly lightened the tense atmosphere, showing that her ways of interacting with others could be unpredictable and full of surprises. This unusual approach caused Wu to rethink her request, perhaps realizing that Soyo's methods in attracting the emperor's attention were far from the ordinariness and simplicity she had hoped for. With a smile that didn't lose her inherent wit, Soyu asked Wu to repeat her question, demonstrating that not all answers could be answered directly and that sometimes sudden and unexpected action might be the best solution. In this mysterious garden, where only a select few could enter, Soyo chose to become an invisible witness to a unique challenge. She, hidden amongst the lush greenery, watched Wu, who had taken on the task of repeating the movements, ornate and full of grace as only Soyo could perform. Wu, with enthusiasm and hope in her eyes, suggested that the emperor start by warming up, preparing for the upcoming test that was to be the culmination of their meeting. But at the most crucial moment, when the air was filled with anticipation, Hap crept up to Soyo in the bushes. His appearance was as sudden as a flash of lightning on a clear day, and he brought with him an offer to try a new dish, diverting her attention from what was happening. Meanwhile, Wu, unsuspecting of the hidden guest, began to demonstrate her skills. Instead of the expected admiration, however, her movements caused only disappointment. Wu failed to catch that invisible line that separated simple movement from the art embodied in Soyo's dance. The emperor, witnessing this sad spectacle, could not hide his disappointment. His heavy sigh echoed through the garden, marking the end of Wu's dreams of recognition. He walked away, leaving behind only silence, broken by the rustling of leaves. So-yu, who had remained hidden all this time, could not hide her embarrassment and disappointment. What seemed like a game to her and an opportunity for Wu to prove himself turned out to be a failure. Hugh Cap, always ready to give his opinion, didn't shrink from commenting, calling what he saw a pathetic spectacle. These words, though said without malice, only added fuel to the fire of So-yo's frustration. She defended her efforts and WU's, stating that she had trained Wu as best as she could, but acknowledging that even those efforts had not yielded the desired results. This story of failure, of endeavor and disappointment, of sudden twists of fate where even the best intentions do not always lead to success, left a deep mark on the hearts of those involved in the events. In an atmosphere of palace intrigue and endless rumors, So-yu uttered words that stirred hearts and minds around her. She openly stated that the emperor's feelings for her were as good as the feelings Hugh Cap had for her. This confession fell like thunder, especially for Hugh Cap, who was stunned by such a revelation. In response to his bewilderment, So-yu began to list the signs by which she decided that Hugh Cap was in love with her. With words that overflowed with a smile and lightness, she asked him to keep his composure and not lose his head from the feelings overwhelming him. Rumors flew like birds among the concubines, spreading the news that So-yu and Hugh Cap supposedly see each other every night. These stories, exaggerated and distorted as they often are within the palace walls, were refuted by Concubine Lee. She boldly and decisively dispelled the rumors, saying that they were nothing but lies. After all, according to her, she had asked Hugh Cap about it herself, and he didn't even know So-yu's name, which should have been irrefutable proof that there was no connection between them. When the maids brought the story to So-yu's ears, she was stunned. Shocked and excited, she couldn't find a place to sit. Her heart fluttered with a multitude of emotions, among them distrust and perhaps a tiny spark of resentment. Without a moment's hesitation, So-yu dashed into the forest with determination. The forest, which had seemed like a place of solitude and a place to be alone with her own thoughts, was now the stage for her upcoming encounter with Hugh Cap. This meeting promised to be full of tension, for So-yu needed to sort through this jumble of feelings, rumors, and innuendo to find the truth behind all these statements and assumptions. Once again, Hugh Cap, with a smile on his face, offered So his culinary creation, a pie. But So-yu stood her ground, rejecting the courtesy with unwavering determination. Her words sounded firm and adamant. She would not accept food from those she knew little about, calling Hugh Cap's offer stone pie. Her reply caused Hugh Cappa to be perplexed and laugh heartily. He couldn't understand why his good intentions were meeting such a wall of incomprehension. So-yu, not wanting to continue this vicious circle of misunderstanding, said that Hugh Cap had been the first to introduce a note of caution and strangeness into their relationship, pretending that they were strangers. With these words, she left, leaving Hugh Cap pondering. The next morning, a courier knocked on So-yu's door, holding a gift from Hugh Cap. When she opened the package, she found a neatly wrapped rice cake. The gesture, filled with care and attention, made her look at their interaction differently. Suddenly, in the back of her mind, she felt that their bond was far deeper and more meaningful than just an exchange of pleasantries between strangers. The change in perception of Hugh Cap as a sincere and caring friend made So-yu grab a quill and paper to write back. In this letter, she wanted to not just thank him for the pies, but perhaps cross an invisible line that had previously seemed insurmountable to her. At the same time, far from the hustle and bustle of the city, in the shady shelter of the forest, Hugh Cap found solitude. His tranquility was disturbed only by a single presence, a soldier who had returned from a mission accomplished. With the report of the gift delivered, he addressed Hugh Cap not so much with military respect as with the deference intended for a person of imperial dignity. It wasn't actually General Hugh Cap, but the very real emperor. Almost simultaneously, in another part of the world where Hugh Cap's real home was located, fate brought him together with Wan, a messenger bringing a letter from So-yu. This letter came as a surprise to Hugh Cap, the real one, not the one who took refuge in the forest thickets, meditating on his thoughts and experiences. Why did So-yu choose to reach out to him specifically when he himself didn't realize there was any special bond between them that would warrant such a personal message? This mysterious correspondence kindled the flame of curiosity in his heart. After all, every word, every gesture, even the most seemingly insignificant in this story, was a link in a long chain of events forming a marvelous pattern of life. So, the real Hugh Cap, holding the letter from Soyo in his hands, felt the thin threads of fate intertwining in this world, creating new knots of relationships he didn't even realize he had. Soyu, the epitome of patience and waiting, found herself in a state of impatient anticipation. Surrounded by the atmosphere of domesticity, she sat immersed in thoughts of the impending reply from Hugh Cap. Time seemed to slow down, counting down the long hours of waiting in every minute, one unreturned, but her hands were empty. There was no response from Seoyo, the one she had been waiting for. Bu Sung, always finding words of comfort, did not lose her optimism. She easily found an explanation for the current situation, suggesting that Hugh Cap might need more time to think and formulate his answer. After all, sometimes words don't come immediately, especially when it comes to matters of the heart and importance. And so, without losing their spirits, they continued to savor the taste of rice cakes that were filled not only with flavor, but also with the warmth of memories. But suddenly, a new decision flashed through Seoyo's heart. With sudden determination, she ordered Wanun to deliver the new letter to Hugh Cap. This decision was a way for her to overcome the wall of silence that had suddenly risen between them. Wanun, like a messenger of crucial news, immediately rushed toward Hugh Cap, carrying a new message. This act was filled with the hope that the words in the letter would find their way to Hugh Cap's heart and become the key to renewing their communication. So, in this whirlwind of events, every action, every decision was filled with deep meaning and expectation of change. Soyu, enduring the excitement of waiting, did not lose faith in the possibility of mutual understanding and continued to search for the way to hook Hap's heart despite all the obstacles. In an unexpected moment, as Wanwoon felt himself being firmly held, his gaze met Concubine Lee's face. The situation took an unexpected turn after Lee familiarized herself with the contents of the letter from Soyu. Her reaction was unpredictable. She couldn't help the laughter that erupted from Soyo's clumsy attempts to reach out to Hugh Cap. This situation seemed so amusing and absurd to Lee that she, without restraining her emotions, announced her decision to personally deliver the message to the Empress. The next scene unfolds in front of the Empress herself, where Soyo finds herself at the center of attention, becoming the subject of a strict trial. The Empress, who had unyielding authority and power, did not hold back her displeasure when she learned of the letters addressed to other men, for Soyo had the special status of the Emperor's concubine. This act was perceived as a direct violation of palace etiquette and personal loyalty to the emperor. The empress's decision was harsh, but it was in keeping with the strict rules and traditions of the palace. The empress's decision was harsh, but it was in keeping with the strict rules and traditions of the palace. This type of punishment was known for its severity and represented not only a physical but also a moral test for the convict, emphasizing the seriousness of the offense committed within the walls of the imperial palace. Being in the isolation of the cold palace, Soyo found inner peace, contrary to all the warnings and scary stories she had been frightened with. This palace, shrouded in many legends and tales of its dark past, was in fact only a quiet refuge away from the main chambers and the ceremonial hall where palace life bustled. In this place, which was a true haven of solitude, Soyo found the opportunity to engage in self-improvement. With each day spent within the walls of the cold palace, she sank deeper into reflection and meditation, finding peace and strength for the trials ahead. Away from the hustle and bustle, Soyo realized that her inner world was far more important than external circumstances, and this discovery gave her confidence in herself and her actions. Realizing that external threat and misunderstanding from others only hardens the spirit, she decided to devote this time not only to meditation, but also to physical training. Soyo was determined that when she returned, she would be stronger in body as well as spirit. Her goal was to learn how to protect not only herself, but also those around her, especially her maids who had suffered because of the court intrigue. The thought of revenge began to take up more and more space in her heart. Soyo didn't want to let those who had dared to hurt her and her loved ones go unpunished. She imagined returning not just as the emperor's concubine, but as a strong and independent woman ready to defend herself and her dignity. In the silence and solitude of the cold palace, Soyo found new strength and determination as she prepared for the day when she would have to step outside its walls and face those who had dared to hurt her. She was sure that this experience, like all the trials she had endured, would only make her stronger. In the silence of the cold palace, where every sound echoed through the deserted corridors, there was a sudden, unexpected noise. So wrapped in a blanket of thoughts and plans for the future, instantly perked up, straining all her senses to realize where this disturbance of the peace was coming from. And then, like a hero from folk tales, the emperor appeared before her, who with ease and grace jumped over the fence to be beside her in this remote corner of his domain. Soyu, barely recovering from her surprise, began to rush with questions, trying to understand the reason for such an unusual and risky visit. In response to her bewilderment and excitement, the emperor, as if playing a mysterious game with her, popped a rice cake into her mouth. This unexpected gesture took Soyo by surprise, causing her mixed feelings ranging from surprise to bewilderment. Calling him with notes of annoyance and reproach, "General Rice Cake!" She tried to unravel his intentions while expressing her frustration over his silence on her messages. She asked him directly why he had not responded to her letters, which were filled with anxiety and worry for his well-being and relationships within the palace. To her utmost amazement, the emperor expressed his utter bewilderment at the said letters. He admitted that he didn't even know they existed, which only added to the mystery of what was going on and revealed the chasm of misunderstanding between them. This moment was a revelation of sorts for Soyu, confirming her suspicions that their relationship was marred by intrigue and innuendo spun by the emperor's entourage. This unexpected turn added another dimension to their relationship, forcing Seoyo to rethink her attitude toward the emperor and her intentions for the future. Despite the suddenness and strangeness of the emperor's action, the moment awakened new emotions in Seoyo and made her realize that there was still a misunderstanding between them that they would have to overcome. Suddenly, Soyu shared her thoughts about how she had gotten into the cool, frost-covered walls of the majestic palace, illuminated by the soft light of the moons. Her words were filled with irritation and hidden excitement. This confession made the emperor feel a wave of embarrassment, for he had not expected that it was his actions that would lead to such consequences. Soyo's fate, intertwined with his own through invisible threads of correspondence, became the focus of the powerful ruler's attention. During an official audience with the empress, who is traditionally shrouded in an aura of grandeur and austerity, the emperor expressed his demand with unexpected determination and clarity to release Soyo. His words sounded firm and impassioned, as if he was not talking about the fate of one person, but about a decision of national importance. After these words were spoken, he left the room without waiting for a reply, leaving behind him an air filled with the weight of unspoken words and disappointment. The empress, left alone, could not conceal her grief. She had always known that the emperor's heart was drawn to matters of national importance, but she had expected their meeting to be an exception, a moment when personal feelings outweighed duty and obligation. However, the conversation, which turned to the unexpected topic of Soyo's release, only emphasized the distance between their worlds. In an attempt to save face and the dignity of her role, the empress issued an order that was supposed to be the solution to the current predicament. She ordered the chief eunuch, the one who was her right-hand man in matters of managing palace intrigue and secrets, to quietly, under the cover of night, deliver Soyo to the emperor's bedroom. This decision was full of silent resonance, for every step of her subordinates through the corridors of the palace, illuminated by the dim light of the lanterns, carried with it a change in the fate not only of Soyo, but of the empress herself, who, like everyone in this castle, was caught in the net of palace intrigue and sentiment. The palace was ablaze with sparks of joy when the maids heard the news of Soyu's unexpected release. Their voices blended into a light whirlwind of merriment, echoing through the corridors like flower petals in a spring breeze. But this moment of joyous excitement was suddenly interrupted by the appearance of the eunuch, whose appearance always heralded new news or a change in the usual course of palace life. With all the seriousness inherent in his position, he pronounced that Soyo had the task of serving His Majesty, as if those words were the key to a new, uncharted door in her destiny. Bu Song, one of the maids, with a delicate sense of tact and understanding of how difficult such news could be received, leaned over to Seoyo and in a quiet whisper, like a breeze carrying secrets, explained the true meaning of the news. Bu Seong's words enveloped Soyu with the coldness of reality, penetrating deep into her heart, leaving a trace of shock and incomprehension there. She felt the space around her narrowing, and the entire palace seemed to freeze in anticipation of her reaction. The eunuchs, servants of the palace, invariable guardians of order and executors of the will of the higher powers, yielded neither to pleading nor to surprise. They were adamant in their decision, letting Soyo know that she should prepare herself for what was to come. The instructions were clear. She was to pay attention to her appearance, and to do so in a way that emphasized her natural beauty without resorting to dressing up after a bath. These words sounded like a hint of the upcoming meeting, which was to take place in the most intimate and delicate circumstances, emphasizing the uniqueness and specialness of the moment. Thus, in the heart of the palace, where every step and word held the depth of centuries-old traditions and secrets, Soyo found herself facing a new challenge that could determine her entire future path. Wrapped in the soft embrace of the bed, Soyo felt like she was part of some strange ritual, moving through corridors and halls in an unusually mysterious manner. She lay there, absorbed in her own thoughts, wondering why they had chosen this method of transporting her to her destination when it seemed so much more logical to allow her to prepare for the meeting in the privacy of the imperial chambers. When the emperor himself entered the room, the atmosphere was filled with a sense of an imminent and important event. His actions, slow and steady undressing, made Soyo freeze in anticipation. She was determined to see the man in front of her, whose body, she imagined, due to the constant confined space of the manor, must have looked frail and unremarkable. However, an image appeared before her that shattered all her expectations. The emperor possessed an impressive physical form. The muscles of his body were clearly pumped and taut, as if crystallized reflections of his inner strength and determination. The admiration that swept over Soyo at the sight of the emperor was so genuine and obvious that he felt her gaze upon him and covered himself somewhat embarrassedly, as if trying to shield himself from too much scrutiny. At this point in time, he asked her a question that sounded almost like bewilderment. What was she doing here? Soyo's answer, simple and sincere, was a bolt of lightning for the emperor. He froze like a sculpture, crushed by the weight of the information he had just been given. This moment of shock, incomprehension, and realization of a new reality enveloped the room, adding a touch of unpredictability to their encounter and forcing each of them to rethink the situation in which they found themselves. On this evening, filled with a mysterious atmosphere and subtle threads of understanding, Soyo approached the emperor with a question that seemed to sound easy, but held deep meaning. She asked him how skillful he was at a certain thing that was of considerable importance to her. This question embarrassed the emperor, for he was not prepared for such frankness. His embarrassment was evident, like a shadow that instantly enveloped his face, and he could not find the words to answer. Wanting to lighten the mood and perhaps add some playfulness to their dialogue, Soyo offered the emperor a choice: remove the mask that hid his true face, or show her his bare torso again in gratitude for her efforts. Her proposal was filled with the spirit of flirting and subtly testing his limits, but the emperor's reaction was completely unexpected. Instead of a response or a playful gesture in return, his reaction surpassed the limits of embarrassment, escalating into complete shock. It was as if he had been caught off guard in the middle of the whirlwind of emotions that Soyo had unleashed with a single question. Finding no other way out of this unexpected situation, the emperor did an extraordinary thing. He gently, as if handling the most precious treasure, pushed Soyo, wrapped in blankets like a cocoon, away from him. With this gesture, it was as if he wanted to preserve their mutual dignity and at the same time set a boundary that he was not yet ready to cross. Then, as if seeking solace in the solitude of his thoughts and feelings, the emperor lay down beside him, preparing for a night's rest. He had no intention of freeing Soyo from the warm cocoon she was carefully wrapped in, leaving her in this safe and cozy shelter for the night. This moment, filled with unspoken emotions and indecision, was a kind of test for both of them, revealing the depth of their mutual perception and the boundaries of personal space. Despite the exciting events of the previous evening, Soyo was still able to find peace and sank into a deep sleep in which her worries and questions temporarily receded into the background. The emperor, for his part, remained awake for a while longer, watching her serene slumber. A smile played on his face, perhaps a reflection of tender feelings or a slight irony at how their evening had ended abruptly. This moment of quiet contemplation was special to him, leaving a warm echo in his heart. With the arrival of morning, reality burst back into their secluded world. The maids, full of excitement and curiosity, woke Soyo, their voices filling the room with excitement. They cheered when they learned that Soyo had stayed in the emperor's room all night, giving the event special significance, though they themselves did not realize that no sensation had actually occurred. They carefully extracted Soyo from her warm shelter where she had taken refuge during the night, wrapping her in airy blankets as if in a cocoon. Later, alone with herself and her thoughts, so you couldn't rid herself of the questions that swirled in her head like fluffy clouds in a spring sky. She paced from side to side, pondering why the Emperor, despite their closeness last night, had never touched her. These musings created a palette of feelings in her heart, ranging from bewilderment to subtle sadness. Like a sudden gust of wind that changes the direction of the leaves on the trees, the Emperor, in the guise of Hugh Cap, broke into her musings. His appearance was as unexpected as his interest in her mood. Like an explorer trying to unravel the mystery of a lost city, Hugh Cap looked into the depths of her eyes, searching for answers to questions that perhaps even she wasn't quite clear on. His sudden interest and concern added new colors to the picture of her experience, bringing an element of uncertainty and anticipation of what was to come. When Soyu shared her reflections on her night with the Emperor, Hugh Cap was so stunned by her candor that he nearly choked on a sudden burst of embarrassment. In an attempt to somehow smooth the moment, he handed her rice cakes, a small gesture of concern and an attempt to steer the conversation away from the delicate subject. His curiosity took over, however, and he couldn't resist asking if Soyo was thinking of him while being near the Emperor. Soyo's reply that she was too busy to think about anyone else embarrassed Hugh Cap even more, emphasizing the sudden awkwardness of the moment. The situation reached a climax when Soyo suddenly suggested that the Emperor was impotent, causing even more embarrassment to Hugh Cap. He hastily tried to defend the honor of his imperial hypostasis by saying that the Emperor was quite healthy, but his words only added fire to the blazing bonfire of awkwardness. Without missing an opportunity, Soyo prodded Hugh Cap, asking how he could possibly know that, thus putting him in an even more awkward position. In an attempt to extract himself from under the blow, Hugh Cap called for his bodyguard as if he were a witness who could corroborate his words. He stated that the bodyguard had seen everything that was going on, a statement that no doubt should have removed all questions, but instead probably only added new ones. This unusual denouement provided not only moments of comic relief in their interactions, but also emphasized the complexity of the relationships between the characters, where every word and action could be interpreted differently, creating a mosaic of undercurrents and hidden emotions. There was tension in the air as Hugh Cap, with a face clouded with regret, turned to Seung-hok to apologize for the unwittingly revealed secret. His gaze, heavy and stern, was full of a mute appeal to Seung-hok to accept the game and play along to save the situation. Seung-hok, caught in the midst of the sudden revelation, felt the full weight of the moment, his gaze sliding between his interlocutors, trying to gauge the magnitude of the implications. Seoyu, meanwhile, was pondering, trying to unravel the tangle of mysteries and conjectures that had unwittingly been thrown in front of her. Her thoughts swirled around one question. How could Seung-hok have such confidential information about the Emperor? Easily going through the possible explanations, she came to an unexpected conclusion. Whether the Emperor had a preference for men, and that was the reason for the awkward situation that Hawk's son had gotten himself into. Soyu's musings that the Emperor might be trying to arouse jealousy in the object of his attention occupied her entirely. With words full of confidence and with a touch of irony, Soyo suggested that the Emperor no doubt had an object of admiration. In this context, she remembered the concubine Wu, who, in an attempt to win the Emperor's favor, had begun to imitate Soyu, believing that this was the kind of behavior that might please the Lord. Soyo, weighing her observations and conclusions, allowed that the Emperor's outings with his concubines could be nothing more than a game designed to arouse jealousy in the one who truly occupies his heart. Thus, this whole maelstrom of events and reflections not only exposed the hidden sides of palace life, but also showed how easy it is to become entangled in one's own feelings and conjectures, trying to understand the true motives of others. Seung-hok, with an incredulous expression on his face, dismissed Soyu's assumptions, calling them absolute nonsense. However, Soyu counterattacked without losing her confidence, pointing to the fact that if her speculation was so far from the truth, the Emperor would not have invited her into his chambers, only to leave her overnight, warmly wrapped in blankets, as a mysterious symbol of his attention. And so, repeating the previous evening, the Emperor again summoned her to himself and, lying down beside her, created an atmosphere of intrigue and expectation. The atmosphere was filled with a silence in which every movement and breath seemed to be loud declarations. The Emperor, addressing Soyu, created a premonition of an important disclosure. But instead of the expected clue to the riddle of his behavior, he suddenly compared it to an egg roll. This strange compliment floating in the air left Soyo at a loss. When the emperor added that Soyo didn't need to know the reasons for his nightly calls, the atmosphere was filled with irony and light teasing. Soyu, never missing an opportunity for a witty quip, suggested that Seonghak would undoubtedly be jealous of such attention from the emperor. Soyu's words, hovering in the air of the room, echoed through the walls. Seonghak's voice boomed back, claiming it was nothing but a lie. This outburst of reaction through the wall added another note of drama to an already tense situation, exposing the complex relationships and feelings intertwined in this story. So, as if in a dance of resentment and sarcasm, the characters continued to play their game, in which each of them tried to find their place and understand each other's true intentions. As the shadows began to densely weave around the corners of the palace's grand halls, the owner of these luxurious spaces, a woman of considerable influence and cunning, was contemplating the sudden rise of Soyo, the young concubine who had managed to win not only the attention, but also the sincere affection of the emperor in just one evening. Seeing this apparent rising star as not only a rival, but also a potential threat to her position and influence at court, especially if Soyo gives the emperor an heir, the mistress of the palace felt it necessary to intervene immediately. She ordered her servants to find Soyo and bring her in to personally find out the young concubine's intentions and try to neutralize the possible threat. When Soyo entered the room, her eyes met with the landlady's, which masked her true feelings and thoughts under a mask of benevolence. The palace mistress announced that she wished to see her more often, offering veiled cooperation or perhaps a test of her loyalty and intentions. Soyu, whose inner instincts suggested the lurking danger of this sudden invitation, accepted the offered tea. She noticed the unusual aroma of the drink, which was so subtle that it was hard to pick up with the naked nose, but her intuition told her that something was wrong. She realized that to refuse the palace mistress's offer would be tantamount to confessing her own suspicions and would probably lead to even more unpredictable consequences. Cautiously, but without apparent hesitation, Soyo lifted the cup to her mouth and took a sip. A moment later, the very atmosphere in the room seemed to change, becoming tense and grave, as if the space itself awaited the inevitable outcome of this meeting. No sooner had Soyu taken a breath than a trickle of blood escaped from her lips, so sudden and shocking that the situation itself seemed unreal. This moment was the culmination of a meeting full of double innuendos and hidden threats, turning into a tragic epilogue for one of the main participants in this drama. In the atmosphere of luxurious halls of the palace unfolded a drama worthy of attention of the most refined connoisseurs of palace intrigue. After the palace mistress, who wields not only power but also cunning, took a drastic step to secure her position and eliminate a potential threat in the form of rising star Soyo, unexpected twists and turns followed. She had only put the contraceptive in the tea and had hoped for a discreet and problem-free solution to the issue without anticipating dramatic consequences. However, Soyo's reaction to the prepared drink led to unforeseen and shocking events. The blood that spurted from the concubine's mouth horrified not only her, but also the mistress of the palace, who had not expected such a catastrophic outcome of her actions. This moment became a turning point, destroying all plans and calculations. A healer was summoned to the scene, whose expertise was to solve the mystery of what had happened. With the announcement of Soyo's broken meridian, the situation took a new, equally intriguing turn. Soyu's sudden realization of her mistake when, in an attempt to prevent possible poisoning, she had acted on her cervical meridian on her own, too forcefully, in an attempt to induce vomiting, added tragedy to the already tense atmosphere. This moment revealed not only Soyo's vulnerability to the intricacies of palace life, but also showed how far characters can go in their quest for power and security. The palace mistress's actions, as well as Soyo's reaction, were a clear indication of how, in seeking to protect their position, people can unwittingly harm themselves and others, driven by fear and suspicion. In a room where time seemed to stop for a moment, Busong stood at the headboard of the bed, wrapping her arms around the railing, her eyes filled with tears of despair and pleading. She persisted, begging Soyo to return to them, to the world of the living, begging for a miracle that would break the shroud of endless sleep. However, Soyo, lying silent, was only pretending to be asleep, hiding behind a mask of indifference to what was happening around her, protecting herself from the pain and disappointments that fate had brought her. The tension in the air was suddenly heightened when the emperor entered the room, whose presence pierced the silence like lightning to the sky during a storm. His gaze was heavy and determined, and when he ordered Bu Xiong to leave, his voice sounded firm. Bu Xiong obeyed, though with a heavy heart, and left the room, leaving the two hearts in the silence of their unspoken feelings. Soyo, for her part, feeling the gravity of the moment, decided to walk away from the conflict, preferring the world of the sleepers, where there was no room for pain and strife, where she could hide from everything that frightened her. Meanwhile, the emperor, left alone, finally allowed himself to remove the mask of impregnability, showing his real face. But so you never got to see that moment of epiphany, losing the opportunity to recognize his true face. Their subsequent meeting was shrouded in a halo of secrecy and mystery. The emperor continued to play the role of Hucap, disguising his true intentions and feelings when he met Seoyo again. This act of masquerade, the intertwining of reality and pretense, remained a puzzle for Soyo that she had yet to solve. In this game of masks and shadows, each in their own way sought salvation and understanding, trying to find their way to the truth through the labyrinths of their fears and desires. With playfulness sparkling in her eyes, Seoyo shared with Hucap about the emperor's unexpected visit during her presumed unconsciousness. Her words, full of slyness, made Hucap feel a wave of unexpected embarrassment. He, assuming that Soyo was plunged into unconsciousness, didn't expect her to perceive what was going on around her. Her story, however, was a surprising fabrication. The emperor had called her the most beautiful creature of all, which only added to Hucap's confusion. Seeing his reaction, Seoyo thought that Hucap was jealous. This moment of insight prompted her to make a frank confession. Despite all the difficulties, Hucap was perhaps even more dear to her than the emperor. But the fear of being caged in a cold palace again just for talking to another man, even if that man was her only friend, tormented her. Soyo didn't want to risk her newfound freedom and the opportunities she was just beginning to appreciate. Then Hucap, catching the depth of her feelings and sharing them, proposed a solution as cautious as it was romantic. They could leave letters for each other under the rock they were sitting on at that moment. This sign of secret union, woven from handwritten words, would be their bridge across the chasm between worlds, where every word left on paper would carry the warmth of their hearts. This suggestion not only emphasized their special bond, but also allowed them to communicate through a prism of discretion without upsetting the delicate balance of their positions in the complex hierarchy of palace intrigue. Soyu, acting according to a prearranged plan, reached the place where the silent stones witnessed the secret correspondence and left there a letter intended for Hucap. This stone, as if imbued with the spirit of past encounters, seemed to her the most reliable mediator of their secretive communication. Stepping away from the stone, she hurriedly hid in the shadows, unaware of the imminent change in her fate. Wu, the concubine, whose ambitions and feelings were deeply hurt, stealthily crept up to the place of secret message transmission just after Soyo left. With dexterity and unkind anticipation, she retrieved the letter from its temporary hiding place. Determination and grim intentions were reflected in her eyes as she, driven by feelings of betrayal and jealousy, went to the Empress to draw her attention to Soyu's intrigues. Wu was convinced that Soyo was the cause of her downfall in the eyes of the Emperor, and now, with the solid proof of the letter, she saw it as a chance to regain her position and avenge her wrongs at the same time. The meeting with the Empress was filled with heavy forebodings. As Wu approached the Empress's chambers, she thought of all the arguments and words that would convince the Empress of Soyu's guilt. Her confidence in the need for revenge grew stronger with each step. The only way to restore justice and dignity was to expose Soyo. The wave of intrigue and accusations raised by Wu was to change the course of events in the palace, jeopardizing not only Soyo's position, but also altering the delicate balance of power and influence within the imperial family. Wu, in her thirst for revenge and her desire to regain the emperor's lost attention, did not realize the full extent of the consequences of her actions, which could unleash a veritable storm in the already troubled waters of palace intrigue. As Wu, filled with confidence in her imminent victory, began to unfold the letter in front of the Empress, waiting for the moment of triumph, the atmosphere in the chambers was tense. However, the contents of the letter, against all her expectations, turned the moment of reprisal into a ridiculous comedy. Instead of the expected revelations and secret messages, the pages were speckled with a variety of rice cake recipes and a list of gourmet toppings intended for them. The Empress, at first alarmed by Wu's sudden conversion, soon couldn't help her anger, taking the whole incident as an unfortunate joke. Wu's disappointment was so great that it was like a dark cloud over her ambition. The Empress shouted and brushed off the incident, and the news of the unusual incident instantly spread throughout the palace. Bu Xiong, one of Soyo's cronies, happily shared the story with her, not hiding her pleasure at the failure of Wu, who was immediately punished for trying to mislead the Empress. Meanwhile, Wan-un, another of Soyu's maids, lamented that since Soyu's illness, her ties with the emperor had weakened, and now there was a risk that his attention might be stolen by another. This remark made Soyu think because she clearly understood that the palace intrigues and love affairs of the emperor were a subtle game in which every move could have unpredictable consequences. A smile slowly spilled across Soyo's face at the thought of Seonhak in her mind, a secret ally and possible key to a substitute in the emperor's favor. Her certainty that Seonghak would be the one to take her place, becoming the emperor's favorite, filled all her thoughts. Under the mysterious light of the full moon, Soyo found solitude, allowing her to delve deeply into her thoughts on the vicissitudes of her relationship. The silvery rays of the moon penetrating through the thin veil of night illuminated her face, reflecting the inner struggle tearing at her heart. She tried to puzzle out whether Gavin's actions had been sincere from the start, or whether his care and attention were merely a mask behind which self-serving motives lurked. Doubts hesitated in Soyo's mind as to whether Gyun had really fallen into her trust, seeking to betray her, or whether his actions were merely the result of the faded feelings that had once burned between them. This loneliness wasn't just the physical absence of someone around, it was the feeling that her heart and soul were isolated from the world, detached from the possibility of being understood and accepted. Gavin, elevated to the rank of hero in the eyes of many, was surrounded by those who never tired of praising him. And the same people who bowed to his name did not miss an opportunity to warn him against Soyo's influence, believing her to be the cause of possible misfortune or even the downfall of Gyun himself. In this complex web of relationships, interwoven with threads of trust and betrayal, love and separation, Soyo was alone with her thoughts and feelings, trying to find answers to the questions that plagued her in the silence of the night. Suddenly her gaze, staring out into the night, registered something unusual. Against the star-studded night sky, the figure of a man who was moving across the rooftops with incredible ease and grace was clearly visible. His movements were so fluid and precise that Soyu couldn't tear her gaze away, following his every jump and maneuver. There was something mesmerizing in these movements, an art worthy of admiration, where every step, every jump was perfectly honed, as if years of practice and perfection had added up in its execution. Suddenly, however, a cold wave of realization ran through Seoyu's heart. This grace and precision of movement, this dance of death across the rooftops, these were not just manifestations of the art of movement. They were the actions of an assassin, a master of his craft who was targeting his victim. Realizing that what was in front of her was not an acrobatic performance, but a preparation for someone's assassination, made her heart beat faster. With this realization, Soyu couldn't stay away. She got up and rushed out of her seat and chased after the mysterious night wanderer. Her steps were silent but quick, for she was careful not to lose sight of the figure that moved nimbly from roof to roof. With each meter, Soyo felt adrenaline filling her veins, giving her the strength and determination to keep up with the unknown man whose intentions were a mystery to be solved. Stalking the mysterious figure in the night, Soyu suddenly stopped like a dumbfounded when her ears caught the sounds cutting through the silence. It was the voices of the maids who were obviously looking for her. At that moment, she realized that her nighttime adventure might raise many questions and suspicions from others. After all, to an outside observer, her actions might have seemed strange at a minimum and highly suspicious at worst. With that realization, Soyo made the decision to back off, realizing that her quest for action, though well-intentioned, needed a more sensible approach. She descended from the rooftops, trying to remain undetected, and made her way to the highest authorities of her state, deciding that this would be the most prudent course of action in this situation. Her steps led her to a meeting with General Kaiman, a high-ranking officer in the investigations division. Soyo, using all her diplomatic tact and wisdom, laid out the gist of what she had seen, emphasizing the danger this night wanderer posed. During her conversation with the general, she also touched on the fact that the assassin's skills and methods of movement suggested that he belonged to some orthodox school, a place where such unique and dangerous skills could be taught. However, sensing that her words might sound too frank and direct, she carefully changed the course of the conversation, adding some levity to her narrative. So you mentioned that the movements of the night stranger were so graceful and light that they reminded her of a bird's leaps gliding through the air. This comparison, though made to soften the overall tone of the story, nevertheless emphasized the singularity of the sight she had seen, and inadvertently highlighted the threat posed by the killer, whose skills allowed him to move so subtly through the city under the cover of night. Soyo scrutinized the map before pointing her graceful finger to where she thought the shadow-chased assassin had fled to. Her gaze was fixed on a point signifying none other than the Empress's majestic palace. Realizing that her every word could have serious consequences, she hastened to declare her innocence, explaining to the audience that, gripped by fear after what had happened, she had preferred to take refuge in the embrace of sleep, seeking to avoid any misunderstanding. Kimon, suddenly entering the conversation, pierced the silence with his words, granting Soyu the status of the only witness who had seen the face of the villain who took King Swobu's life. His words sounded like a sentence, and a look of bewilderment flickered in Soyo's eyes. Kimon, sensing her confusion, hastened to explain that Swobu was not a stranger to him because he was his half-brother, as if trying to give his words more weight. Kimon's words about not being able to verify Soyo's claims about the true culprit brought a tinge of conspiracy into the discussion, giving her the unexpected power of being able to accuse anyone of a crime. The lure of power would have enthralled many, but Soyo was troubled. She worried that there might be a second witness in this dark story who would refute her words. Under the weight of these thoughts, she sank into silence, pondering every possible course of fate, while the tension in the air became more and more palpable. As dawn broke on the palace, a morning full of unexpected twists and turns came. The emperor, awake in his majestic solitude, could not help but notice the absence of Soyu beside him. The familiar warmth of her presence was replaced by the cold of emptiness, leaving him pondering her meaning in his life. But the morning silence was broken by the sudden arrival of Seunhok, who brought news that could alarm even the heart of a ruler. Seunhok, with seriousness in his voice, announced that Seoyo had been detained and was currently at the investigation department giving a statement. Seunhok's words hit the emperor like thunder, leaving him in a state of shock and bewilderment. The trouble that Soyu was getting into seemed like an unending chain of events, each one deepening his anxiety. At that moment, Seunhok, standing in front of the emperor, mentally came to the conclusion that the root of all of Soyu's troubles lay not somewhere outside, but beside him, in the emperor himself. After all, even Swobu's death, mysteriously laden with the shadow of conspiracy and the desire for power, was the result of his own order. This inner monologue of Seunghok's was full of the realization of the gravity of the situation in which they were all involved. The emperor, shaken out of his initial stupor, suddenly took decisive action. He ordered Hugh Cap to go to the investigation department immediately and use all the influence of his name to free Seoyu. That order sounded like a mantra of action, reflecting not only his desire to protect Soyu, but also showing his willingness to use his power to save those he cared about. At the moment when Soyu's fate was hanging in the balance, Hookhap appeared at the door. He immediately asked Kimon to release the girl. Kimon, however, standing affirmative and unwavering, refused to even consider the matter, explaining that Soyo was a key figure in the case they were investigating and her testimony was crucial. Hugh Cap's reaction to the news of Swobu's tragic fate was one of bewilderment and shock. It was not easy for him to realize that the world he knew was crumbling before his eyes. Kimon, noticing Hugh Cap's confusion, didn't miss the opportunity to remark caustically about the rumors that were going around the city. Those rumors were about Hugh Cap's alleged feelings for Soyo. And now, according to Kimon, they had been confirmed, given how insistent Hugh Cap had been in demanding her release without even knowing the circumstances of her detention. In this tense exchange of remarks between Hugh Cap and Kimon, it seemed that Kimon had the last word, making it clear that Hugh Cap had no right to interfere in the affairs of his department. However, as if fate had decided to intervene, a messenger burst into the department with a message from the emperor that instantly changed the course of events. The imperial decree demanded the immediate release of Soyo, calling into question all of Kimon's previous reasoning. With irony and a clear challenge in his voice, Hyuk-hap addressed Kimon with a question that at that moment sounded almost like a verdict. Does the Emperor have the right to do this? This moment was a test for Kimon, for he was caught between the Emperor's iron will and his own convictions about the rightness of his cause. Hyuk-hap's question was not just a question about power, it was a question about loyalty, justice, and who ultimately holds the levers of control over the destinies of people in their complex and multifaceted world. Under the heavy gaze of circumstance, Kimon, accompanied by the weight of the Emperor's decision and the influence of Hyuk-hap, entered the gloomy interrogation room where Soyo awaited her fate. Kimon's words that her release was made possible by the intervention of higher powers sounded like music to Soyo. Despite the relief of realizing her approaching freedom, Kimon's words that he would continue to monitor her actions left her heart feeling uneasy and misunderstood. Why did she, a girl without any malice in her heart, continue to be viewed through a prism of suspicion? Freed but still shrouded by the veil of misunderstanding from the law, Soyo rushed to express her gratitude to the one who had become her beacon of hope in a sea of uncertainty. With a pile of rice cakes symbolizing her deep gratitude and respect, she came to Hyuk-hap to personally express her feelings. But fate decided to add another twist. When Soyo was ready to hand over her pastries to Hyuk-hap, his servant stood in front of her with a message that stumped her once again. Hyuk-hap had already accepted her thanks, and now she should have left. This moment was a new challenge for Soyo. The feeling that her appreciation and desire to express gratitude had been rejected made her think about many things, including the complexity of human relationships and how sometimes even the most sincere gestures could be misinterpreted or not accepted. Hiding in the shade of the mighty tree that towered next to Hyuk-hap's gate, Soyo pondered her next move. With childlike naivety and pure-hearted determination, she held tightly in her hands a basket of rice cakes made with her own hands. The flame of hope burned in her heart to present them to Hyuk-hap as a token of her gratitude and respect, in spite of all the difficulties and dangers that might befall her along the way. Her determination knew no bounds. She would do anything to achieve her goal. But when Hyuk-hap appeared in front of her, her surprise was unparalleled. A completely different man stood before her, not the courageous and enigmatic warrior she had encountered the past few days. Confusion flashed in Seoyo's eyes, and she sank into deep thought. Who was the man with whom she shared her thoughts and hopes, and how could he pretend to be Hyuk-hap so skillfully? These questions swirled around in her head, making her heart freeze with uncertainty and anxiety. The sudden realization that she could have been a toy in someone else's hands spurred Soyo to the decision to run. She couldn't afford to fall victim to deception or get caught up in an even more convoluted affair. With these thoughts, she disappeared into the night, leaving behind only questions and uncertainties as to what she should do next. However, fate had its own plans for Soyo. Suddenly, that night, the Emperor again ordered her to his bedroom. This turn of events added even more mystery and anticipation to her already tense and full of surprises. What could have prompted the Emperor to invite her again? What new trials and adventures awaited Soyo in the depths of the imperial palace? These questions remained unanswered, while Soyo walked towards her destiny, trying to find answers to her concerns and decide how to proceed in this tangled world of intrigue and mystery. He immediately sensed the change in her mood, catching the shadow of sadness in her eyes, and could not remain indifferent to her inner struggle. He asked her the reasons for her depression, trying to plumb the depths of her soul with his gaze filled with sympathy and understanding. Soyo, feeling supported and cared for by the Emperor, couldn't resist sharing her doubts and fears. She asked him how he would feel if he were in her position of having his trust undermined by deception. This question made the Emperor think, and he noted with deep philosophy that people sometimes resort to lying for their own reasons. His words echoed the wisdom of the ages. While deception is never a virtue, it is important to try to see the situation from different angles and understand what might have motivated a person to act in such a way. Soyo, still resentful of the false Hyuk-hap, showed her displeasure and barely listened to the Emperor, preoccupied with her thoughts and feelings of betrayal. However, when the Emperor gently pointed out her lack of attention to his words, recalling how he had helped her by retrieving her from the investigation department, her heart filled with gratitude. Suddenly she realized how much he cared and supported her. She turned to him and expressed her deep gratitude, as if a ray of sunlight had broken through the clouds and illuminated her face. This moment opened a new page in their relationship for her, demonstrating that even in the most difficult situations, you can find understanding and support from those who truly care about you. Upon returning to his modest but cozy abode, Soyo was in for a surprise, left by the care and attention of the highest echelon of power. The table was hospitably set with dishes as if from the most luxurious feasts. It was a gift from the Empress herself, a symbol of recognition and respect. The maids, with awe and wonder in their eyes, reported the origin of this feast, and in response to their modesty and devotion, Soyo did not hesitate to invite them to share this warm gesture of generosity with her, showing her gratitude and equality even in such moments. As they sat around the table, sharing dishes skillfully prepared by the palace's culinary staff, the conversation flowed easily, but Soyo's thoughts were somewhere far away. She pondered the words the emperor had left her, worrying about the severity and consequences of the deception. If someone is impersonating someone else, she thought, then the motives behind such an act can hardly be pure. But what would make a person take such a risk? In this mosaic of events, she tried to find room for the real Hugh Cap, whose silence and lack of response seemed increasingly mysterious. A picture began to form in Sioyo's mind in which the false Hugh Cap could be none other than a close friend or acquaintance of the real Hugh Cap, possibly acting with his knowledge or even at his request. The thought seemed both a revelation and a new mystery to her at the same time. Why would the real Hugh Cap allow such a scenario to unfold? What secret threads linked him to the man who had taken such a gamble? And most importantly, what consequences awaited them all when the truth came to the surface? All these questions swirled in her mind, creating a dense web of guesses and assumptions as she continued to share dinner with those around her, trying to find answers in the complicated world she was so unexpectedly thrust into. At the dawn of a new day filled with fresh promises and unsolved mysteries, Sioyo met Hugh Cap, whose mysterious nature continued to trouble her. Despite her discontent and growing curiosity about his true identity, she was determined to solve this mystery that pulsed in her heart with every beat. She was so determined in her intentions that it was as if a flame was enveloping her, ready to burst out and rain down on Hugh Cap in a torrent of accusations and questions hungry for answers. However, when Hugh Cap, like a magician, pulled out a rice cake from his folds, the atmosphere around them suddenly changed. This small but meaningful gesture awakened memories of home and comfort in Soyo, bringing with it peace and tranquility like a quiet spring breeze dispersing the clouds of misunderstanding and irritation. So Yeo, feeling distrustful of Hugh Cap and his claims of being the real General Hugh Capin, decided to put him to the test by offering to tell a story from the war. She was sure that his inability to reproduce the true story would make him look like a fraud, for how could a man who had not fought in the wars tell a credible story? To her surprise, Hugh Cap shared a story that was so prosaic and devoid of any embellishments that it seemed quite plausible. He described how his unit was able to overpower the enemy by simply outnumbering them. Hugh Cap emphasized that real battles are far from the romanticization often found in books and legends. His words sounded so sincere and convincing that they could make one believe he was involved in the war effort. Afterward, Hugh Cap, as if seeking to turn the conversation to a more personal level, asked Seoyo to share stories from his life. He mentioned that the emperor had started sending her food frequently, which could be taken by others as a sign of special attention. However, Soyo was quick to dispel this assumption, stating that such gestures on the emperor's part did not carry a deep personal interest. She confidently expressed the idea that all this is just a courtesan game, aimed at creating a certain image in the eyes of the public, and in fact the heart of the emperor belongs to a completely different person. These words of Soyo revealed a deep insight into the political and personal intrigues reigning in the highest echelons of power, and showed her insight and ability to see behind the mask of public expectations to people's true feelings and intentions. In the silence of the forest, where every whisper sounds like a loud conversation, Soyo unexpectedly shared a secret with Hugh Cap that was capable of changing views and perceptions of many things. She quietly said that the emperor's heart belonged to none other than Seonhak. These words stunned Hugh Cap, for such an admission seemed incredible and yet reasonable, given the complex intertwining of personal and political relationships in their world. It was all the more stunning that Seonhak, who was standing guard in the distance and trying to remain unnoticed, had also heard the words. Later, when the emperor found solitude in the bosom of the same forest, his meditations were interrupted by an unexpected guest, the fourth Grand Duke. He commented on the emperor's meeting with Soyo with ease and a certain amount of mockery, admiring her fertile imagination and her ability to play a game that could confuse anyone. But as to the heart of the matter, the Grand Duke observed that, in spite of all the intrigue and secrecy, the emperor seems to have found one who is able to love him for what he really is, without knowing his true title and the face hidden behind the mask of Hugh Cap. However, adding a note of humor, the Grand Duke named Seunhak rather than So-yo, thus adding irony to an already tangled tangle of relationships and feelings. Thus, in this meeting in the woods, where every word and every whisper is laden with heavy meaning, the deep secrets of hearts, the intrigues of the corridors of power, and the uneasy paths the protagonists have to follow are revealed. And while the wind rustles the leaves as if trying to tell its own story, the complex relationships between the characters take on new twists and turns, bringing more intrigue and unpredictability to the story. That day, like many previous days, Seoyo again received a shipment of rice cakes. These dainty treats, sent ostensibly from Hukap, were beginning to cause her not only surprise but also deep irritation. In the back of her mind, Soyu felt that there was someone else behind those packages who was only using Hukap's name to play with her feelings. She could not understand how long her friend was going to continue this game of pretending to be a famous general. Desperation and bewilderment forced her to take drastic measures. To this end, Soyo turned to Wan-un, one of her most trusted and executive assistants. With an unmistakable expression of determination on her face, she assigned Wan-un a task that would clear up the situation once and for all. Wan-un, determined to fulfill Seoyo's assignment, secretly infiltrated the palace where the real Hee-Hawk-Hap lived. She was carrying an object that would be the key to solving the mystery. As soon as Hukap appeared at the threshold of his grand dwelling, his attention was caught by the figure of Soyu, who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. With undisguised excitement and hope in her voice, she turned to him with a question that had been lingering in her mind for a long time. Questioning whether General Hukap was really standing in front of her, a desire to know the truth flickered in her eyes. This moment was the culmination of the long thoughts and doubts that had plagued her. The question, thrown in the face of fate, was to dispel all shadows of uncertainty and bring calm to her soul. After the tense and unexpected question that Seoyo asked Hukap, the latter suggested a walk, trying to create a calmer and friendlier atmosphere for further conversation. They set off on a walk during which there was an awkward silence all around, as if each step along the path was taking them deeper into a world of unspoken thoughts and feelings. The nature around them seemed to witness their inner struggle, and even the singing of birds could not break the wall of silence between them. Finally, Hukap found the strength to break the silence. His words were heavy, as if each of them required a great effort on his part. He confessed that he has a friend whose heart is beating in unison with his feelings for Seoyo. However, Hukap confessed that he was not sure if the feelings were romantic or just friendship. Moreover, Hukap revealed with sadness in his voice that he had given his consent for this friend to use his name in his correspondence with Seoyo, trying to help him express his feelings that way. The important point was Hukap's admission that he was not at liberty to reveal the real identity of this mysterious friend. This confession, made with a noticeable weight on his heart, was accompanied by a request to Soyu. Hukap asked her to be magnanimous and give his friend a chance, even though he had tricked her into it. He prayed that Soyo would allow this friend to continue communicating under his name, giving the undiscovered individual a chance to try and convey his true feelings to her. This conversation was an unexpected twist in a story she had thought was a joke or a game. Now she was faced with a dilemma that required not only understanding and sympathy, but a decision that could change the course of their relationship. A battle raged in her heart between the desire to know the truth and the fear of damaging the delicate threads that bound them to this invisible friend. Lee, hiding behind the draperies by the window, became an unwitting witness to this unusual conversation between Hukap and Soyo. She stared at them, trying to unravel the mystery of their relationship, which became more and more confusing with every word they said. Lee pondered the possibility of going to the Empress to complain about Soyo, but the realization that it would hurt Hukap kept her silent. After all, revealing this secret could put Hukap at a severe disadvantage, and Lee didn't want to become the cause of his troubles. Meanwhile, at the Emperor's meeting with the concubines that took place on the same day, the atmosphere was filled with special trepidation. The Imperial Mother also attended this meeting, giving it a special status. However, the emperor's gaze invariably rested on Soyo, whose fate and the dilemma of the false Hyukhapa remained unsolved to her own. Soyu, feeling the emperor's intense scrutiny, was still in contemplation as to what she should do next with this tangled tale of deceit and secrets. Suddenly, wanting to give the event a new twist and diversify the program, the empress invited all the concubines to recite poetry. This proposal was a real challenge for Soyu, as she had never studied poetry. The thought of speaking in front of the entire court and the emperor himself was a mixture of excitement and dread. Soyo panicked, for her inability to recite poetry could put her in a very embarrassing position and undermine her reputation at court. At this moment, it seemed to her that all the eyes of the courtiers were fixed solely on her, waiting to see how she would get out of this difficult situation. In the atmosphere of tense anticipation, with everyone in the room holding their breath, it was time for Soyu to show herself. Slightly embarrassed, she stood up, feeling the stares of everyone present. The words she had once heard popped into her mind like a beacon in the dark. Words spoken from the heart always resonate with listeners. Confidence in the truth of these words inspired her to an unusual act. She decided to recite a poem, which she composed on the fly, embarking on a risky voyage on the waves of her imagination. Soyo started talking about rice cakes, thus causing bewilderment and suppressed laughter among the concubines. Their glances, full of skepticism and barely restrained amusement, however, could not shake her resolve. The poem, filled with genuine love for the simple joys of life, enveloped the audience for a moment in the magic of sincerity and simplicity. But the sudden twist in Soyo's poem, where she hinted at realizing the true nature of a certain brownie, instantly took everyone in the audience's breath away. The words about the cake, consisting of sticky rice, made the audience stunned with surprise, enveloping the room in an awkward silence. That moment was the turning point, when gazes intertwined in silent agreement and hearts beat in unison with Soyo's unexpected candor. A realization of the depth of her words flashed in the emperor's eyes, for it was he who recognized himself in the image of this pie. Despite the confusion caused by her words, deep down he felt more than just a play on words. Soyo looked back at the huddled audience and realized her poem had elicited just the reaction she needed. In that moment, she realized that the true gift of speech can open hearts, break down walls of misunderstanding, and create bridges between souls. The boldness and sincerity of her performance became a symbol of an invisible connection between the audience, demonstrating that real art knows no boundaries and is capable of evoking the most unexpected emotions. After the waves of Soyu's poems washed up on the shores of the palace intrigue, the emperor, continuing the game of masks, invited her to a one-on-one meeting, once again dressed in the image of Hyukhap. He started the conversation by admitting that his masquerade had been exposed, that Soyo had seen someone else behind Hyukhap's guise. In this space of halftones and enigmas, Soyu noted with confidence and playfulness in her voice that the true Hyukhap possessed incomparable beauty, and then, like a chess player advancing a piece on the board, asked about the real name of her mysterious interlocutor. The emperor, like a skillful player in the game of the ages, chose the tactic of silence, preferring to maintain a distance between them, thus guarding the mystery of his identity. In response to his evasiveness, Soyu noted with ease, like a leaf floating on a water surface, that her earlier words had already lowered his status from rice cake general to mere rice cake. However, as a sign of balance in their metaphorical game, she confessed that she too held a secret, a hidden secret that she could not reveal, maintaining the space of mystery and mystery created between them. The emperor, like a traveler who had stumbled upon a tantalizing mystery, could not restrain his curiosity and immediately wished to know the secret, because for the ruler, accustomed to the disclosure of the most intricate intrigues, the unknown becomes an irresistible temptation. But Soyo, with a sage smile, gently but firmly defended her boundaries, indicating that they would both keep their distance, thus further stoking the flame of interest in his eyes. Thus their meeting turned into a duel of wits and words, with every move shrouded in mystery and intrigue. This dialogue, an interweaving of riddles and innuendo, created a special space between them, where every word, every glance has deep meaning, and the airy distance between them is filled with the electricity of anticipation and possibility. That day, when the sky was flooded with the bright colors of sunset, creating an atmosphere of warmth and comfort, he handed a small pouch to Soyu. Inside it were patties of sticky rice prepared with special care and concern. Soyo felt a wave of surprise and bewilderment as she took the unexpected gift in her hands. How could he know about her poem? She had only told it quietly, as if she were whispering to nature, not expecting her words to resonate in anyone's heart. Her mind began to churn with speculation that perhaps the verse had already spread throughout the courtyard, becoming common knowledge. Soyo ran through the possible scenarios in her mind, but settled on the idea that even though she didn't know his name, she felt a certain peace of mind. She too had kept the fact that she'd been reborn a secret. It was their invisible bond, a game of understatements and secrets they conducted without resorting to words. Meanwhile, the minds of the rulers were engaged in a very different dialogue. The emperor, drowning in deep thoughts about the mysterious Soyo, could not escape the thought that her seeming naivety and simplicity concealed a deep secret. Seong-hok, his trusted advisor, suggested that Seoyo might have made up the secret just to provoke the emperor, angry at his stubbornness and unwillingness to open up to her completely. The thought made the emperor shudder. The emperor shuddered, and a fear began to rise in his mind. Was Soyo playing a dangerous game with him, trying to seduce him for his own ends, perhaps even to seize power? Did you not see Seong-hok behind her outward beauty and attractiveness, a cold and calculating mind? The emperor turned to his advisor, expressing his concern and doubts about Seoyo's true intentions. This question hung in the air, filling the space with a sense of uncertainty and anticipation of a denouement that could change the course of their relationship and perhaps even the fate of the entire state. That evening, when the sky was covered with stars, creating a mysterious and enigmatic background over the quiet streets of the city, Lee, the embodiment of curiosity and restlessness, went to Hyuk-hap to find out the truth about the rumors that had already managed to shroud her mind like a dense fog. Her questions were simple, but at the same time incredibly important, for they touched on the heart and feelings that bound her to Seoyo and Hyuk-hap. Lee was eager to find out if Hyuk-hap really had warm feelings for Seoyo, which could completely change the course of their destiny. Hyuk-hap, a man closed and full of secrets, was faced with a dilemma. His answers were avoidant and evasive, as if he were trying to hide a deep secret that could shatter not only his own world, but the worlds of those involved in the story. Suddenly, as if determined to change the course of the conversation, he broke the news to Lee that made the world around them seem to freeze. Their obligations under the marriage arrangement were no longer valid. This statement puzzled Lee, for now all her former confidence in the future seemed only an illusion. Meanwhile, Soyo, alone in her secluded dwelling, enjoyed the simple pleasure of sticky rice cakes, which proved to be a source of pleasure as well as reflection. The flavor of these patties, beyond anything she had tasted before, prompted her to speculate on the origin of such an exquisite treat. It was more than just food. It was a clue leading to the realization of her mysterious friend's status. Connecting all the dots, Soyu came to a startling conclusion that turned her understanding of the situation upside down. Her friend was probably a eunuch serving in the imperial court. This discovery was both a breath of fresh air and a new mysterious twist in her already confused fate. Buseong's appearance was so sudden and dramatic that it instantly caught all of Soyu's attention. The news of the senior eunuch's body being found in the well was like a cold shower, making the heart freeze with shock and fear. Soyu, overwhelmed with excitement and anxiety for her mysterious friend, couldn't hold back a question about the dead man's appearance, which might have seemed inappropriate under the circumstances. However, it was the only way for her to try to learn the fate of the man who had become so close to her. Buseong, despite her bewilderment, confirmed that the killer was Lee's concubine, who had already been detained for questioning. This added more mystery to the story. Deep in the forest, by the stone that had come to symbolize the secret meetings between Soyo and her mysterious friend, she waited for him, staring idly at the empty path. Her heart filled with anxiety with every minute of his absence, for today, when the air was saturated with foreboding, he had not come. This absence was an ominous omen, and it heightened her inner anxiety. Toward evening, as the shadows grew longer and the sun hid behind the horizon, the emperor came. He seemed to be shrouded in the same mystery and enigma as everything else that was going on around him. The discovery under their stone, a letter, was a new twist in this tangled story. The letter could have provided answers to many questions, or on the contrary, it could have further confused the situation by adding new riddles and speculations. Thus, events continued to develop into a spiral of intrigue and mystery, where each new discovery only deepened the mystery of what was going on and made one wonder how much in this world remains beyond comprehension. In the silence of the forest, illuminated only by the soft light of the sun, the emperor carefully reread the letter lying on the table in front of him. In it, Soyo, with a trembling heart, asked for a sign that he was still alive. This moment was filled with expectation and hope, nourishing her soul in these difficult times. Meanwhile, in another wing of the palace, a very different drama was unfolding. Concubine Lee was embroiled in a grim story about the murder of a eunuch that had shaken the palace. She was interrogated in an attempt to uncover any contradictions in her words. Lee, however, insisted on her innocence. She claimed that her presence at the well where the crime was committed was an accident, and that she witnessed the murder, which horrified her. She told how she had been drawn into this dangerous game without her knowledge, not daring to mention the night's encounter with Hugh Cap, which might cast a shadow of suspicion on her words. In her accusations, Lee pointed to Soyo, claiming that it was because of her actions and requests, that Lee was at the center of the devious plan and at the scene of the murder. Under pressure, Lee suddenly claims that it was Soyu who asked her to meet at the crime scene, adding a new twist to an already convoluted story. While the palace was living these events, Soyu, the unwilling participant and central figure in the story, received a letter. Her heart hammered in anticipation as she unfolded it. The words written on the page confirmed her deepest hopes. The friend she had been so worried about was alive. This news was a ray of light in the darkness that had enveloped her lately. As soon as the first rays of morning light broke through the dense curtains of the palace, unfreedom and anxiety found Soyo again. The guards walked like shadows through the marble corridors to bring her before the face of the adamant Kaiman. At that moment, time seemed to stop, heralding a new turn in events that were already confusing enough. In an interrogation where every glance could have been an accusation, Kaiman announced with unmistakable seriousness that Soyo was the prime suspect in the eunuch murder case. In response to his accusations, Soyo dutifully pointed out that the bond between her and Lee wasn't enough for secret one-night stands, especially with such grim consequences. Her words floated in the air like a light spring breeze, but they didn't resonate in Kimon's heart. Under Kaiman's orders, Soyo was thoroughly searched for anything dangerous or compromising. And now, seemingly routine procedure turns into an unexpected turn. Among Soyo's personal belongings, they find a letter from a friend whose words, "I'm alive, sleep well," instantly interest Kaimon, feeding his suspicions even more. What was supposed to be only a comfort to the soul has become a subject of doubt and further questions. The interrogation dragged on into the evening, hanging a heavy cloud over Soyo, and Kaimon, like a flying carpet, tried to extract a confession from Soyo at any cost, promising that she would not take a step toward freedom until she confessed to the crime. However, when it seemed that darkness and despair would swallow up the last vestiges of hope, fate presented an unexpected twist. Kimon's coworker appeared with news that pierced the gloomy atmosphere of the room like lightning. The emperor demanded the immediate release of Soyo, stating that the disputed letter was from himself. Kimon, whose position and confidence had hitherto seemed unshakable, found himself in despair. His plans and convictions, built so carefully, crumbled under the inexorable will of the emperor. This moment was a turning point, bringing clarity and confusion to the souls of everyone present at the same time, illuminating Soyo's path to unexpected salvation. So you suddenly wondered how the emperor could have known about the note, considering it was unlikely that anyone would have reported such a thing to him. In the depths of the night, when silence covered the imperial palace with its mysterious blanket, something happened that was imbued with a special charm and mystery. Soyo, wrapped in blankets like a mysterious roll of the finest and most exquisite fabrics, was once again brought to the emperor. It was a moment filled with extraordinary intrigue and warmth. Despite the late hour and the darkness enveloping them, the emperor's actions were illuminated by the light of unexpected care and attention. The emperor himself, who usually kept away from personal contact, suddenly took Soyo in his arms and carried her to his bed, as if he wanted to protect her from all harm. At that moment, he made a remark full of ambiguity. When he said that concubines in his world often got into trouble, he suddenly singled out Soyo, as if there was something special and admirable about her ability to get into such situations. Soyo took those words as more than a simple compliment, feeling singled out from the crowd, special in the eyes of the emperor himself. After that, the conversation suddenly turned to the subject of the mysterious note, as if shrouded in a haze of mystery and intrigue. The emperor, as if playing with expectations, evasively remarked that he had learned of it through the request of the writer of the letter himself. This revelation was greeted by Soyo with delight and genuine curiosity, as she had not expected that the emperor could be so closely connected to the events of her life. The realization that her dear friend Rice Pie was among the emperor's inner circle brought a smile and joy to Soyo's face. At that moment, she confidently decided that her assumption that Rice Pie was a eunuch serving at the court had only been confirmed. This thought gave her strength and confidence that friendships and connections can have unexpectedly great value in the most unusual circumstances, creating new, unexpected intertwining of destinies and opening up uncharted horizons before her. That evening, as the soft light of the moon filtered through the thin curtains, creating a play of shadows in the spacious room, the atmosphere was filled with tension and the silence of waiting. The emperor, with an intuition that caught the change of mood in the air, gently yet unexpectedly approached Soyo, asking her a question that sent a spark of invisible confrontation through the air. His words, heartfelt and quiet, touched Soyo's heart directly. Did she want the attention he was giving her to continue? Soyo's answer, imbued with honesty and fatigue from the burden this attention had placed on her, sounded negative. She felt the heavy consequences of someone else's favor falling on her shoulders. The attacks, the jealousy, the intrigue that was directed against her by others who were tired of the endless struggle for a place under the sun in this closed world of palace intrigue. All of this was the reason for her desire to get away from a dangerous life of risk and uncertainty. The emperor, hearing her words filled with weariness and despair, could not hide his disappointment and sadness. With a light, almost imperceptible gesture, he stroked her head, as if trying to comfort her or transfer some of his power. They went to bed that night. A gust of wind gently pushed the curtains closed, and time seemed to stand still for a moment, waiting for something inevitable. After this incident, the emperor no longer invited Soyu to his bedroom, as if an invisible line had been crossed and their paths had diverged. As rumors and half-truths filled the corridors of the palace, Concubine Lee witnessed the winds of change begin to whisper new stories. She listened to the news, which included information about how the emperor had personally sent a eunuch to extract So Yeo from the investigation department, and even a mention of Hyuk Hap, who was also rumored not to have to deal with So Yeo. These words cut Lee's hearing, filling her heart with heaviness and disappointment, but at the same time, a vow of vengeance was ripening in them. As the palace fell into the darkness of night, a mysterious council emerged among the shadows and whispers of the maids. One of them, as if guided by an unknown force, suggested that Lee meet with a man who had the unusual ability to grant wishes. The suggestion hung in the air like a promise of hidden power that could overturn destinies and change the course of history. Lee, gripped by a mixture of hope and dark forebodings, realized that a path was opening before her that she had not yet tread, a path that could lead her to revenge or to her downfall. Under the cover of night, in the silence, when only the slight whisper of the wind broke the static calm, Lee was at the predetermined meeting place. Her figure, looming in the darkness, seemed part of the surrounding atmosphere, merging with it into one. In her hands, she held a piece of red silk, symbolizing blood ties and betrayal, an object that was supposed to be the key to resolving a long-standing feud. Her gaze was fixed on the dark wall in front of her, where at any moment a mysterious stranger was about to appear, a masked man about whom many rumors and speculations were circulating. Despite his determination and iron will, Lee's heart was pounding frantically in his chest from the anticipation of the encounter and the fear of the unknown. And then, when her doubts were at their peak, when it seemed as if the meeting would never take place, he, the masked man, appeared silently out of the darkness, like a ghost. His sudden appearance made Lee shudder, and her heart sank for a moment with fright. Lee gathered her will into a fist and voiced her desire: revenge against Hyuk Hap and Soyo, two individuals intertwined with her own fate through a fateful series of wrongs and betrayals. The masked man, showing no emotion, accepted her words coldly and stated that his services would be rendered. However, the price for such a favor was unexpected. Lee had to perform a strange task, burying something in a place where no light penetrates, leaving a note nearby with the cryptic words, "May Cheon Youngpi's true recovery occur." As an advance payment for his services, the masked man gave Lee a lock of blonde hair, a symbol of the imminent fulfillment of his promise. "That's what we should bury." Meanwhile, in a completely different part of the world, Soyo learned that her name had become the subject of ridicule among the courtiers. The emperor, who had previously paid her favors and summoned her to his presence, suddenly and inexplicably cut off all contact. This discovery was like a cold shower for her, for she began to realize that her position at court and in the eyes of the emperor had become extremely precarious. Shrouded in the tranquility of nature, Soyo chose a modest rock for her temporary retreat, where she was going to wait for rice pie. However, fate decreed otherwise, and instead of the expected guest, a fourth prince approached her. His sudden appearance, instead of joy, caused Soyu to have rather mixed feelings dominated by disappointment. Her reaction put the prince in quite a quandary, for he had no doubt expected a warmer welcome. Among other things, Soyu couldn't hide her irritation towards one of the prince's attributes, his fan. The answer to her displeasure was the prince's story that in Murim, a mysterious and enigmatic land, there was a clan whose warriors used fans not as objects of luxury or decoration, but as powerful weapons. However, Soyu, not imbued with the story, considered such practices nothing more than showing off, devoid of true greatness and depth. Reflecting on the prince's words, Soyo concluded that he did not understand the true spirit of Murim at all, envisioning it more as a place for easy entertainment than as a great arena for battles and feats. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden statement from the prince, who, as if trying to regain her attention, mentioned his interest in Gavin of Murim. The name sounded like a challenge to her, for Gwen was one of the key figures in their shared context of knowledge and interest. Moreover, the prince also mentioned Master Nenpi, adding another layer of mystery and reticence to the conversation. Thus, in this unusual meeting, through the exchange of opinions and stories, the contours of the deep and complex world of Murim began to emerge, where each name, each legend hid behind itself whole stories full of heroism, wisdom, and sometimes tragedy. Watching the uneasy interaction between Soyo and the prince, the conversation took an unexpected turn when the discussion touched on Nyonpi's reputation. Soyo couldn't resist commenting that the fame enveloping Nyonpi was far from unblemished. In response, the prince, as if seeking to defend his position, emphasized that despite everything, these individuals have impressive strength and will to act, mentioning Gowon, who committed the murder of Cheon Nyongpi, and also Cheon Nyongpi herself, who he said managed to return from the world of the dead. These words deeply shook Seoyo. She, who had once been Cheon Nyongpi herself, was now facing a reality in which her past identity had been appropriated by another. This revelation made her heart sink, and her mind seize with shock and bewilderment. The prince continued, telling how Nyonpi, after her mystical return, had been saved by the Sahabi gang and had even joined them, now teaming up with the ringleader to plan revenge on Gevon. The prince's words stirred a storm of emotion in Seoyo's mind. Her mind began to form an image of the current Nenpi, who, in her opinion, must have been completely devoid of reason to have voluntarily contacted the Sahabi leader. After all, he was known for his cruelty and recklessness, considered by many to be a true psychopath. This information only added new shades of reflection to Soyo's soul about how unexpectedly and sometimes tragically fates can intertwine in this tangled world where past and present, living and dead, valor and madness are in constant and unpredictable dialogue. Burdened with an overwhelming desire to expand her horizons and learn more about the world beyond the palace's majestic but confining walls, Soyo realized that she needed to spend more time on her training. These efforts were to prepare herself for the upcoming trials and adventures that might await her outside the castle. During this reasoning, the space around her was suddenly filled with a strange sound. Her own name from her past life echoed in the air. The sound was so unexpected and mysterious that it seemed to come out of nowhere, for none of the maids had said it aloud. Cheon Nyongpi, the name that had remained in her heart forever, rang out again, this time causing Seoyo to faint and fall to the cold floor of the palace, as if all reality around her had suddenly faded and dissolved into mist. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, dramatic events of their own were unfolding. Hugh Hap, one of the emperor's most loyal and high-ranking servants, had arrived with a report that would shed light on the dark corners of the intrigue surrounding the royal family. With all seriousness and officialism, he reported that King Swobu, despite all rumors and speculation, did indeed have secret ties to the dangerous and powerful Sahabi gang. At this moment, while Hugh Cap's words were still in the air, an excited servant ran into the hall, as if fate itself had sent him with news that instantly captured the attention of everyone present. In a trembling voice, he announced that Soyo, the emperor's favorite and a mystery to everyone, had suddenly collapsed. The news spread like a whirlwind throughout the palace, reaching the farthest corners of the palace. At the same time, somewhere very close by, but at the same time being away from the hustle and bustle of palace intrigue, Li, whose thoughts and actions were always shrouded in secrecy, also learned of what had happened to Soyo. The news took her by surprise, causing her heart to stir with feelings and thoughts. Li wondered if the curse she had long since cast on Soyo was still in effect. A shadow of doubt and hidden hope flashed in her eyes, for every event in this castle, every secret and every whisper carried a depth of meaning that could change the course of history. Wu, who had become an unexpected mediator between the hidden corners of the palace and his beating heart, revealed the veil of secrecy by reporting the emperor's anger, which had come crashing down on the palace walls like a storm due to Soyu's sudden fainting spell. From her words, a picture emerged in which every beat of Soyu's heart, beating with incredible slowness, seemed like an echo of fate hanging in the balance. This discovery shook Li to the core, for she had foreseen the consequences of her actions, but not to such a dire degree. The realization that her actions could have irreversible consequences brought fear and dread to her. She had never wished things had gotten this far, and now that reality had surpassed her wildest imaginings, Li was gripped by panic. She especially feared for Hukap's condition, for his fate now seemed most vulnerable to her, as the revenge she had insidiously plotted against him and Soyu had suddenly turned against herself. With these thoughts, overwhelmed with the urge to remedy the situation, she set off at a run, hoping to prevent what seemed already inevitable. Meanwhile, in the heart of the palace silence, where time seemed to stand still, a miracle occurred. Soyo, whose existence was teetering on the edge of two worlds, suddenly woke up. This moment marked not only her return to consciousness, but also her return to the body of Cheon-Yong-pi, the name that echoed in her past life. This awakening was like a rebirth in which the boundaries between past and present were blurred and destinies intertwined in an unbreakable pattern. At that moment, Soyo, or Cheon-Yong-pi, stood on the threshold of a new beginning, where every breath and every moment took on new meaning. In the depths of silence, alone with herself and her surroundings, Nanpai indulged in meditation. It was a moment of inner calm and concentration as she, letting the streams of qi flow through her, sought harmony of mind and body. This process made her realize that she had regained her former body. The sensation of returning to the very roots of her existence filled Nanpai with joy and delight. However, this joy was overshadowed by the fact that she was in a place that was completely unknown to her, and from there she had to find a way out. Nenpi's thoughts rushed to the distant past, to rice pie and the emperor, to those whose hearts might have been filled with anxiety and worry over her sudden disappearance. She thought about the thin threads of feeling that bound them to her, the complex palette of emotions that could encompass them at the thought of her plight. Nyongpi couldn't escape the thought of the maids, who she remembered crying with grief when Soyo was confronted with the fateful poison. This memory reminded her of her own struggle with the poison that had forced her from her body, and now, finding herself again, she couldn't understand how she had stayed alive. After feeling for a pulse, Nenpi was confronted with an unfathomable discovery. Her heart didn't make the slightest beating sound. This discovery made her heart freeze if it could beat. As she removed her outer clothing, she discovered a scar on her chest, a scar that was mysterious and spoke volumes, a scar that signaled that her heart had been lost. At that moment, while Nyongpi was still trying to put together the mosaic of what was happening in her head, Tacheon-cheon appeared in front of her. His appearance was unexpected, and his gaze was filled with anger. He dressed Nanpi as if to protect her from unknown threats and told her that she had to keep her body. The words sounded like a verdict, opening a new chapter in her already mysterious story. The moment the tension in the air reached its limit, Cheon-cheon announced with unyielding seriousness that if Nyongpi's body was harmed, he wouldn't hesitate to take her life. These words, sounding like a cruel ultimatum, caused a surge of emotion in Nyongpi. She grabbed him and screamed in desperation and anger, accusing him of madness and demanding an explanation of where her heart had been taken. This flash of passion and despair, a glimpse of the true Nyongpi, awakened Cheon-cheon's joy. He realized that the Nyongpi he knew and valued was back in front of him. In a burst of relief and joy, he hugged her, despite all the previous words and accusations. However, Nyungpi, who couldn't stand this turn of events, pushed him away with force, once again showing her independence and fortitude. Xianxian took a step back, noting that the one who had saved her life could and should be treated much more gently. He began to talk about how he had found her lifeless body in the cave, as if trying to justify his actions and let her know that everything that had been done to save her. But the story was cruelly interrupted. Nanpai's head suddenly spun and the world went dark. Her strength left her and she collapsed again while Qianqian screamed, worried about Nyongpi. In that brief moment between consciousness and unconsciousness, an incredible transformation took place. Nyongpi became Soyu again. When she came to, the first thing she felt was someone's hands holding her down. As she looked around, she saw the emperor in front of her, holding her hand with care and concern impalpable even in his sleeping form, as if trying to convey his support and assurance to her that he would be there for her despite the twists of fate. This moment was filled with deep feelings and mutual understanding, intertwining the fates of the characters even tighter. As the first rays of morning light penetrated through the thin curtains, filling the room with soft light, the emperor was suddenly awakened from a deep sleep. Joy played in his heart as he discovered that Soyu, his companion, had finally woken up after a long, restless wait. Soyu's mysterious fainting was a surprise to everyone, and her regaining consciousness was a true relief to the emperor. However, despite her relief, Soyu felt mixed feelings. The consciousness back in her body was floating in an ocean of confusion. Her thoughts were confused, and she couldn't understand why her soul was back in her own body. Seeking answers, she turned to the emperor, hoping to learn the reason for her sudden fainting spell. However, the emperor standing in front of her had no answers. His concern and care for Soyu was obvious, but he had no knowledge of the cause of her condition. At that moment, Soyu's thoughts turned to Xianxian, the mysterious being she assumed might have knowledge of what was happening. She had a hope in her heart that Xianxian would be able to solve the mystery, opening the way to understanding her own experiences and inner world. Unexpectedly, overwhelmed with emotion, the emperor embraced Soyu. His embrace was full of desperation and pleading tenderness. The words pouring from his lips were sincere and touching. He begged her not to reject his care and favor, expressing his desire to continue sharing a bed with her while she slept. For the emperor, it was more than just a desire for intimacy. It was a need to feel safe and secure around Soyu, for without her presence, his soul was filled with anxiety and worry. His confession entailed deep emotional feelings, revealing the depth of the bond between the emperor and Soyu, testifying to the complexity of their relationship, in which passion, caring, and unresolved questions intertwined, shrouding their fates in a fog of mystery. At that time, away from the tumult of palace intrigue and the anxiety that gripped the hearts of everyone who cared for Soyu, Li went about her business with hope in her heart. She, being wise and determined, dug out a lock of hair, truly believing that this act would help break the heavy chain of the curse that seemed to shroud them all in a fog of uncertainty and fear. Li's actions were filled with desperation and hope as she sought to find salvation for her loved ones from the unknown threat that hovered in the air. Suddenly, as if fate itself had decided to intervene in the current state of affairs, Kimon appeared. His appearance was so unexpected that it was as if he had cut through the shroud of silence that had protected the moment. Kimon, whose figure had always been associated with important and sometimes disturbing news, was once again in the way of their destinies. Meanwhile, the morning rays of the sun illuminated the face of Soyu, who, anxious and full of questions about what was happening around her, sought to solve the mystery of her feigning spell. With great excitement, she inquired about the events that had taken place in her absence. However, what she learned only deepened her confusion and anxiety. It turns out that the real Soyu's soul never returned to her body, leaving it an empty shell in the moments she thought she was with them again. The discovery was shocking and made her heart sink with uncertainty and anxiety over her fate. Won-un, trying to comfort Seoyo, began to recount how the emperor, overwhelmed with worry and concern, scolded the physician for his inability to diagnose and find a cure for Seoyo. But even at that moment, her thoughts were far away from here. So Yeo, concerned about Rice Pie, her faithful companion and protector, felt his heart filled with anxiety and worry as much as her own. Her instinct told her that he was probably out of his mind, worrying about her well-being. Before she could act on that realization, however, the situation escalated again. Kimon, whose appearance always heralded a new turn of events, had entered their lives with news that made everyone freeze. This time his visit wasn't about Soyo. He came to report on Lee, who had been detained and taken to the investigation department. The announcement came like a thunderclap, introducing new anxieties and questions into the already confusing story of their lives. In the gloomy room, lit only by the dim light of the penetrating sun, a tense scene unfolded. Kimon, a man with a shrewd eye and an unyielding calm, turned to Soyo with a question that weighed the weight of betrayal and suspicion. He told her that Lee had been apprehended on suspicion of putting a curse on Seoyo. It was a moment that took Seoyo by surprise, for Lee was not only familiar to her, but was more deeply involved in the intertwining of their fates than anyone around them had realized. Kimon continued by asking a question that sounded like thunder to Seoyo. He asked if she had been hiding her real name, Cheon Young-pi, under the name of Seoyo before she became the emperor's concubine, suggesting that she might have changed her name to start a new life at court. Soyu flared up like fire at such an accusation. The fear and horror that flickered across her face was inseparable from the sense of deep insult. She shouted back, claiming that the name Soyo had been given to her since she was a child, and the idea that she could be associated with curses and dark deeds only made her cringe. Kimon, who had been listening intently, accepted her words and bowed out with dignity, leaving Soyo alone with her thoughts and fears. Night shrouded the palace in darkness, and Soyu wandered aimlessly through its corridors like a shadow. She wondered how Kimon could have known her true name if she had tried so hard to hide her past and all its secrets. In the back of her mind, she decided that she needed to distance herself even further from who she used to be so that no shadows of the past could reach her in her new life. But in the silence of the night, when every rustle seemed loud, Soyo sensed that she was being watched. This feeling of indefinable anxiety and unease enveloped her like a cold fog, causing her to look over her shoulder for the elusive presence that seemed to follow her relentlessly on her heels. In the heart of the night, when the silence of the palace was broken only by the whispering of the wind, fate dealt Soyo a new, unexpected blow. Her stalker emerged from the darkness like a ghost, and at that moment, time seemed to stand still. Soyu, who was suddenly under threat, instinctively reacted to the attack with agility and strength that no one expected from her. With incredible precision and speed, she stabbed at her attacker's chest, skillfully letting in a stream of qi, a force that was within her control even without the use of internal energy. That moment opened up the possibilities of her long-forgotten art, and the assailant was flung away like a leaf in a whirlwind, unable to resist the power of the blow. She stood over her defeated opponent, assessing the situation with grim determination. Soyo realized that any move from here required extreme caution. The idea of reporting the attack and finding the pursuer seemed logical, but at the same time she ran into a wall of realities of her position at court. Facing Kaiman and having to explain how she was able to fend off the attack and defend herself put her in a dilemma. Admitting that she possessed martial skills would be tantamount to admitting that she was indeed a Nyungpi master, and it could finally ruin her current life. With that thought in mind, weighing the pros and cons, Soyo made a decision that seemed to her to be the only possible way out of the situation. She decided that the best thing to do would be to cover up what had happened, to keep her secret intact. With unprecedented strength and determination, she dragged the body of her attacker farther into the woods, leaving him there in the hope that when he awoke, he would consider it best not to return. This decision, though fraught with its own risks, allowed her to keep her double life secret for a moment from anyone who might use her true nature against her. Suddenly, in the semi-darkness of the softly moonlit night, Soyu noticed something resembling a shadow moving ahead of her. It was an unexpected discovery, for she had thought that no one could follow her. Her strength was running out. She realized that she would not be able to lift the weight of her pursuer's body onto the roof to hide it from view. Therefore, acting under the power of self-preservation instinct, Soyu hastily concealed the body in a narrow, dark crevice where it could not be seen by the naked eye. Before she could catch her breath, Kimon emerged from the darkness, his appearance as unexpected as it was untimely. He, with obvious curiosity in his voice, asked what she was doing here at this late hour. Soyu, trying to hide her excitement and recent activity, replied evasively that she was just admiring the night beauty of the moon, trying to divert his attention from her person. Kimon, who at first offered to escort her to her private quarters, soon noticed her evasiveness and growing agitation. His intuition told him that something was wrong. With undisguised interest and wariness, he wondered if she was hiding something from him, trying to penetrate the depths of her gaze, which darted about in search of an answer. With those words, he motioned for her to step aside to get a better look at where she stood, and to make sure there was nothing suspicious that might raise further questions or doubts in his eyes. So Yu, finding herself in an extremely difficult position, did the only thing that came to her mind, retreated. But as soon as Kimon took a step forward to inspect the place closer, she gathered all her remaining energy and gave him a powerful ki energy punch right in the face. The force of the blow was so great that Kimon could not resist, flew backwards and lost consciousness, falling to the ground. This action doubled the amount of problems for Soyu. Now she was not only facing the question of how to hide the stalker's body, but also what to do with Kimon. She looked around for a place where she could hide the two bodies, but in the end, deciding not to make it harder, she simply laid them on top of each other, trying to make their location less conspicuous. At this moment, when the tension was at its peak, Kimon's men suddenly rushed to the scene. So Yu, realizing that her chances of going unnoticed were rapidly dropping, quickly made the decision to lie down next to the bodies, trying to look as if she, too, had been hurt. When Kimon's men found 3 bodies on the ground, with Soyu among them, they were immediately confused, not understanding the full picture of what was happening. The situation became even more complicated when the mysterious masked man received news of the failure of the assassins sent to Hukhap and Soyo. According to rumors, Soyo managed to escape thanks to Kimon, who spotted the approaching threat just in time. This information added intrigue to an already convoluted story, leaving all parties in the dark as to the true motives and next steps of each of the characters. At dawn, when the first rays of sunlight barely touched the window frames, a new message burst into Soyo's life. The eunuch, minister of palace secrets and messenger of the emperor's will, appeared like a shadow, bearing news that made the air hang with the anticipation of change. He announced that the emperor was once again inviting Soyo, but this time the terms of the meeting were different. She was not required to undress, which added intrigue to the upcoming event. This message caused Soyo to have mixed feelings, from relief to bewilderment to curiosity about the emperor's intentions. The night was wrapped in a veil of mystery and mystery as Soyo headed out to meet her destiny. The meeting took place in a canopy nestled in the middle of an artificial lake, offering a mesmerizing view of the palace, shrouded in the silence of the night. The emperor was waiting for her there, and the atmosphere around her was permeated with a sense of the importance of the moment. The emperor's eyes were filled with concern and worry for Soyo, as news of the attack on her had reached his ears, causing a wave of worry for her well-being. He expressed his intention to provide her with reliable protection, suggesting that a guard be assigned to her. Soyu, whose heart was filled with a desire for independence and freedom, tried to object, sincerely not wanting to be burdened by anyone's constant tutelage. However, before she could form her arguments, the emperor did an unexpected act. From behind his back, he pulled out a bouquet that was intertwined with the scents of night flowers and held it out to Soyu. The gesture was full of symbolism and tenderness. The words that accompanied his gift were even more moving. The emperor confessed that he could not fight his heart's desire to have her by his side. These words, imbued with sincere passion and love, were directed straight to Soyu's heart, leaving her to face the inevitable choice between her desire for freedom and the emperor's suddenly found love. Soyu was in a state of shock when faced with an unexpected confession. Her heart was beating faster than ever because the words she was about to say could change everything. She knew in her heart that she did not have the feelings for the emperor that he had hoped to see in return. The strength of her resolve swept over her as she gathered her thoughts and finally expressed what she had been holding in her mind. She did not love the emperor. There was more than a lack of feeling in that confession. It was a sign of her inner resistance and her own heart's defense against further painful trials. Reflecting on the fact that she had never intended to be the object of anyone's affection, especially after her feelings for Gavin had turned her into an enemy to all of Merim, only strengthened her resolve. She realized that the emperor's love could bring even more trouble than Gavin's. Moreover, the experience of betrayal, which had already left a deep imprint on her soul, was causing her to be apprehensive. This fear of betrayal sounded a dark melody in her heart, making her look at the future with anxiety. However, the emperor's reaction was unexpected. With surprising calmness and understanding, he confessed his feelings, speaking of them as something unshakable and pure, even knowing that his love would not be reciprocated. There was no judgment or disappointment in his words. He asked Soyo not to reject his feelings, to let them exist alongside her without asking for anything in return. This moment was a startling moment for Soyo. She saw before her a man capable of loving without expectations or conditions. When Soyo, confused, asked what would happen if one day she found herself with feelings for the Emperor, his answer made her wonder. The Emperor offered to think about it when, if ever, it would happen. There was hope in his voice, mixed with the realism of someone who understands that the future is unpredictable, and every feeling, every choice can change fate in unpredictable ways. This conversation gave Soyo a new perspective on her relationship with the Emperor, bringing a note of gentle anticipation and patient recognition of the depth of human emotion into their interaction. With the new turn of events, times have become difficult in Soyu's life. Her surveillance intensified after a eunuch took over her personal protection, making her secret training even more risky and difficult. She had to find new ways and places to practice to keep her skills a secret from everyone, especially the assigned guard whose eyes constantly watched her every move. At this tense moment, Kimon, one of those involved in the whirlwind of events entangling Soyo, arrives at her door. Kimon's appearance was marked not only by his presence, but also by a noticeable bump on his head, a memorable sign of their last meeting. Oddly enough, Kimon had no memory of getting that bump, and his mind had no recollection of how Soyo might have hit him. In his mind, there was only a vague version of the events of the day he thought he had saved Soyu from the assassin. Kimon's skepticism about this was obvious, and he decided to look into what had happened, despite his annoyance at Soyo's usual reluctance to share information. The dialogue between Soyo and Kimon revolved around a mysterious incident where Kimon, trying to understand what happened, asked Soyo about her possible role in disarming the assassin and subsequently knocking out Kimon himself. Soyo, faced with a direct question, chose an unusual way to answer. She showed her arms, emphasizing the lack of muscles on them, which was supposed to be proof of her physical weakness. The gesture was filled with subtle humor and irony, for Soyo had indeed never focused on training her body in the traditional sense of the process. Instead, she focused on developing an inner energy that made her powerful in the eyes of those who could understand it, and utterly mysterious to the rest of us. This moment was not only a turning point in their interaction, but also emphasized the uniqueness of Soyo's path, who, despite her outward-seeming vulnerability, possessed deep knowledge and power hidden from the eyes of the world. The moment Kimon, confused and gripped by doubt, made the decision to leave, believing in Soyu's words about her innocence and his inferior ability to reflect due to memory loss, a heavy sigh of relief filled the atmosphere. Soyo, left alone with her own thoughts, wallowed in contemplation of her vulnerability, which she thought would disappear if she had more inner energy. This inner dialogue suddenly led her to a bold decision, to meet the Emperor, as if in this meeting lay the answer to all her questions and doubts. Meanwhile, in a remote and exquisitely decorated hall where every piece of the interior was filled with history, the Emperor is holding a conversation with the fourth prince. The core of their conversation revolved around the relationship between Soyo and the Emperor, the thin ice they were treading on seeming to demand caution and wisdom. The prince, whose opinion carried weight, suggested that the Emperor throw off the mask of anonymity and meet Soyo face to face without hiding behind a false name. However, the Emperor, like a dragon clad in majestic robes, insisted that in those robes, Soyu was obligated to respect him, but under the name of rice cake, they could be equals. This duality of relationship seemed a perfect harmony to the Emperor. When Soyo suddenly appeared like a shadow, touching and passing the silence of a secluded place where footsteps seldom went, she interrupted their conversation. The Emperor, understanding her coming as a desire for secret meetings where they could be alone, far from the eyes and ears of the courtiers, assumed that she was seeking just such intimacy. However, Soyo, steadfastly and with unexpected determination, declared that the Emperor himself should not visit the place either. Her words, shrill and unwavering like the wind that changes the direction of a river, brought a new twist to their complex and multifaceted relationship, leaving the Emperor wondering about Soyo's true intentions and what she was really looking for in this tangled tangle of fates and emotions. Back in the days when the sun rose above the empire, illuminating it with its brilliant light, there came a day full of surprises for Soyo. The Emperor, a great ruler of undoubted wisdom and power, took a special interest in the young girl. This place, hidden from the eyes of many, was to be a haven for Soyu, where she could focus on perfecting her skills. But when Soyu, full of determination and excitement, was ready to begin her training, the emperor himself came into view. His unexpected presence took her by surprise. He stood before her and opened his heart, declaring that this place, hidden from the eyes of the world, was his private sanctuary, his secret haven where he could be himself, far from the affairs of state and the burden of the crown. Soyu did not hide her bewilderment. After all, she had made it clear that she wished to train in a place where not even His Majesty's shadow would be present. To which the emperor, with a slight smile, paid attention to her words, emphasizing that Soyo was apparently the only one in the entire empire who did not wish to share her time with him. Moreover, he emphasized that she was the only one whose presence really mattered to him, which made her unique in his eyes. The situation was gaining momentum when the emperor, noticing her gaze, asked an unexpected question, asking if she would like to kiss him. There was a tension between them at that moment, for her desires were far from it. In fact, she was feeling something else, something more violent, wanting to slap him for his insolence and insolence. Unexpectedly for Soyo, the emperor offered her a play on words, asking her to repeat phrases after him as if trying to engage her in a kind of ritual where each word had its own weight and meaning. The situation reached a climax when he practically forced her to utter words of love for him, words that should have sounded like a confession of her feelings. But Soyo, staying true to herself, reminded him of his own desire, the desire to experience unrequited love. This moment, filled with complex emotions and subtle psychology, ended when the emperor turned to leave after stroking her, leaving Soyo to ponder what was happening. This meeting, full of ambiguous moments and hidden emotions, opened a new chapter in their relationship, forcing to think about the boundaries of personal space, true desires, and how unexpectedly intimacy can turn into the opening of the most intimate corners of the soul. The day the mysterious news reached Soyu's ears, the sky was covered in a shroud of concern and the air was filled with anxious anticipation. A message from Wan-un, a loyal servant that the Empress Dowager wished to meet, pierced Soyeo's heart with the coldness of the unknown. In a world where every word and gesture could have hidden undertones, meeting such a figure portended a difficult conversation. Soyeo's decision to seek advice from Rice Pie was a non-spontaneous yet logical step. Pie, a creature of mystery and wisdom, knew the subtleties of court etiquette better than most. Their friendship, though not without its rough edges, was a beacon in the stormy sea of intrigue and secrets that washed over the walls of the imperial palace. The meeting with Pai didn't unfold the way Soyo had expected. His resentment that she was avoiding their usual meetings was palpable in his every word and gesture. Soyu, thinking that Pai was troubled because of the failed attempt on her life, tried to solve the mystery of his present position in the palace. Her speculation that Pai might not just be a eunuch, but a key figure in a complex network of palace conspiracies made her heart beat faster. In an attempt to diffuse the tense atmosphere, Soyu uttered words intended as a joke, but which, to her surprise, only deepened the chasm of misunderstanding between them. The assertion that what's in your pants isn't the most important thing hit Rice Krispie Treat much harder than she would have guessed. His reaction, a mixture of amazement and shock, made Soyo realize that she had unwittingly touched on much deeper and more personal topics than she had intended. This moment opened up a new understanding for Soyo of how complex and multifaceted the relationships between people in the imperial palace were. Every word, every gesture could have a weight capable of changing destinies, and every step had to be considered. One of those days, as the sun bathed the world in its golden light, Soyo turned to Rice Pie for advice. This moment, full of earnest search for answers, was illuminated by the smile of Rice Pie, who always seemed to be in a state of deep thoughtfulness and calm. With interest shining in his eyes, he inquired if Soyo was seeking to win the heart of the emperor himself. Such thoughts were foreign to her, however. She sought no such attention or fame. Her interests lay on a completely different plane. Soyo was concerned with the identity of the emperor's mother, whom she was about to meet. Her account of this planned event was full of anticipation and excitement. Rice Pie, always noted for his wisdom and ability to find the right words, suggested that Soyu be herself. He shared the story of how the emperor's mother once became disillusioned with a man who tried to appear in a better light to her by discarding his true self. This advice was much more than just a recommendation to Soyo. It was a reminder of the value of authenticity and sincerity in relationships. Rice Pie assured her that the real Soyo was already the best version of herself. The words caused a surge of warm emotion to surge through Soyo. Her cheeks flushed, and her heart was filled with light and joy at the realization that such an acknowledgement came from someone she felt truly understood her. Earlier, in distant Murim, her life had seemed filled with different hues, where every day was a challenge, and sometimes she caught herself thinking that perhaps she should never have been born at all. But those words of Rice Krispie treats, simple but extremely important, were a light in the tunnel of the past for her, a reminder that each person is unique and important just the way they are. From then on, a new hope and belief in herself settled in her heart, which was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The atmosphere of the meeting with the Emperor's mother was so tense that it was as if one could catch sparks of anticipation in the air. With every moment, every glance exchanged between those present, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, adding a sense of coldness to the emotional discomfort that already existed. Soyu, who found herself in the center of this frozen storm, felt doubts begin to creep into her mind, making her think that perhaps she had made some mistake that could be the reason for such an icy reception. Nevertheless, when the Emperor's mother, a woman whose greatness and authority was undeniable, suddenly turned to ask Soyu about her next course of action, the atmosphere in the room changed slightly. Soyu's reply, unexpected and sincere, in which she mentioned the dependence of her actions on whether the concubines would have weapons, seemed to break through the icy shroud. This moment of sincerity and directness made the Emperor's mother reveal herself from another side, showing that even in a heart accustomed to palace intrigue and constant caution, there was still room for joy and humor. Her laughter, rare and precious, was a sign that sincerity could still resonate even among walls filled with intrigue and secrets. The Emperor's mother's further statement that Soyo was superior to Kogwal was not just a compliment, but a weighty acknowledgement, for the comparison was not to someone ordinary, but to someone who had left a notable mark in the history of their world. Soyu soon learned that the deceased emperor had a deep dislike for Kogwal, which made the Emperor's mother's words even more meaningful. Kogwal, the commoner who had won the heart of the first princess of Hui Yong, was universally recognized as a good man. However, behind this mask of virtue was a lust for status and power that caused him to manipulate the feelings of the princess. This upheaval in Kogwal's perception on the one hand, and Soyo's frank, direct dialogue with the Emperor's mother on the other, emphasized not only the complexity of human relationships in their world, but also the value of sincerity and authenticity in a world where every word and gesture could have ulterior motives. In this encounter filled with expectation and tension, Soyo's sincere response was the key to breaking down the walls of mistrust, demonstrating that even in the most unexpected circumstances, honesty and authenticity can open doors that others could only dream of. In the dark, mystery-shrouded atmosphere of the past, Seoyo is plunged into a whirlwind of memories, feeling the heavy cloak of fate once worn by the former Empress Hui Yan. This fate proved to be too much for both women to bear, as Soyu, like Hua Young, faced the fateful outcome of her life's road, cut short at the same turn: betrayal and loss. Images come to mind, shrouded in the haze of the past, when her story with Gavon began, the moment when a hand of salvation reached out from the darkness toward her. That meeting was no coincidence, as if fate itself had directed her to Gavon in a moment of dire need. The chase, Soyo's desperate flight from his pursuers, seemed to have no end and no hope of escape. Until he appeared, Gavin like a beacon in a dark storm, ready to point the way to salvation. That moment remained forever in her heart as the beginning of their close bond, braided by the threads of fate and shared trials. In the same timeline, but in a different reality, Gavon, immersed in thought and solitude, took a seat at a table in a secluded corner of the inn. His thoughts were full of dark colors, overshadowed by a deep hatred for Cheon Youngpi. This hatred grew out of the deep pain caused by her decision to end her own life, which left an indelible mark on his soul. But suddenly, like thunder, there are whispers that grow into loud cheers. Rumors that Nyeonpi is alive, and what's more, she's now part of the shadow world, having joined Sahabi's gang. Gavin, as if seized by a flame of anger and distrust, seized the unhappy messenger of this news, demanding from him the confirmation of his words. For to him, Nyeonpi was not just a name, but an entire story intertwined with his own life. The idea that she could have been alive and even taken such a dark path seemed unbearable. And then, just when it seemed that his anger and frustration had reached a climax, a man appeared before him claiming to have seen Nanpi with his own eyes alongside the Sahabi leader. These words seemed to offer him a new chapter in this mysterious story, full of deceit and betrayal, but also hope for the possibility of regaining lost ties. The rain pounded on the roof, melodic and persistent, as if trying to retell its long story. Soyo, sitting on the doorstep, watched this wet spectacle of nature, realizing that her plans for training today would have to be put on hold. The world outside seemed blurry and distant until a quiet knock on the door brought her back to reality. Hugh entered her territory, his gaze full of determination and an expression frozen on his face that Soyu couldn't exactly decipher. With unaccustomed directness and without the slightest hint of hesitation, Hugh made a request that took Seoyo by surprise. He wanted her to help free Concubine Lee from prison, promising in gratitude even something that might have seemed unbelievable, the chance to see the Emperor's face without the veil. However, Hugh's proposal was met with an unyielding wall of rejection. Seoyo, with mixed feelings, couldn't understand what made him risk his own reputation for the Emperor's concubine. Her question about what Lee and Hugh had in common caused him to reveal his cards. When he learned that they had been engaged before Lee became a concubine, Seoyo felt the depth of his feelings and the tragedy of the situation. This revelation made her rethink her refusal. Although Soyu didn't agree to help release Lee directly, she found a way to show compassion for Hugh by writing a receipt confirming that Lee had no part in the curse placed on her. The gesture, though seemingly small, was full of deep meaning and understanding beyond simple help. It was a display of humanity in a world where power and intrigue often trump kindness and justice. At the moment when Hugh promise hung in the air like a light scent of hope, promising thanks to Soyu for her invaluable help, the silence was interrupted by the sudden appearance of the Emperor himself. His sudden arrival was like a flash of lightning lighting up the sky on a dark night, adding more drama to the already tense atmosphere. The Emperor, whose heart beat in unison with jealousy as thunder boomed in his chest, wasted no time. With an undisguised determination and a sternness that could make even the bravest of hearts tremble, he ordered Hugh to leave the room immediately. His words were clear and unyielding, leaving no room for objection. He explained his decision with the need to have an important conversation with Soyu, making the audience feel the weight of the conversation. After Hokap, leaving behind the reticence and questions, left the room, the Emperor and Soyu were left alone. The moment was filled with a special tension, for the words that were about to be spoken seemed like heavy stones on his heart. The Emperor, struggling to find the words, opened his soul to Soyo, confessing that he could not bear the thought of his beloved leaving him for another. These words, imbued with painful sincerity and a sense of loss, were like the confession of a man on the edge of a precipice. After saying that, he also left the room, leaving Soyu alone with her thoughts and worries. But the silence that enveloped the room after the two men left didn't last long. Soon it was broken by Lee, who had been freed by Soeyo's efforts and had come to express her gratitude. The meeting of these two women was filled with a special meaning, as each of them was experiencing their own personal drama related to the events happening around them. Soyu, accepting the words of thanks with dignity, modestly redirected them to Hugh, pointing out his significant role in their fates. Lee, caught off guard by this turn, couldn't hide her surprise and embarrassment at the realization that Hugh still cared for her. In gratitude and recognition of her feelings, Lee handed Soyo a bottle of tonic, convinced that it would help Soyo in her relationship with the Emperor. The gesture was not a mere formality, but a sincere expression of gratitude and support, symbolizing the invisible bond formed between the two women as a result of their ordeal. On this particular day, as the wind playfully whipped up dusty curls in the path of our story's heroes, Soyo, a girl with a restless heart and a clear mind, found a solution to an intricate situation that seemed insoluble. She decided that the solution she had found in the form of a tonic vial given to her by Lee as a thank you would be given to none other than Rice Pie. This character who incorporates all shades of hope and devotion turns out to be key to her mysterious plan. When the moment of truth arrived and Soyu, with a slight hesitation in her heart, held out the vial to Rice Pie, his eyes shone with an extraordinary light. He gleefully accepted the gift, but he saw in her eyes a call for secrecy and a promise. With genuine delight in his voice, Rice Krispie promised that the potion would be used solely by him, for he understood the depth of trust Soyo had placed in him. This exchange was not a simple passing of an object from hand to hand. It was an exchange of trust, hopes, and hidden intentions. Soon after this exchange of confidence, Soyo, in her aimless wanderings through the palace grounds, encountered the figure of the king, who, shrouded in an aura of impending business, was preparing to travel to the capital. The air was filled with anticipation as none other than Yun Boho, a person famous throughout Murim for his deeds and accomplishments, was about to arrive in the capital. So-yu, whose fate had intersected with Yun Boho's deeds more than once, realized the importance of his arrival. Her past encounters with him when he had revealed her hiding places had left a deep imprint on her memory and now made her uneasy. Thinking it over, So-yu couldn't escape the thought that Yun Boho might have knowledge of the fake Nyongpi, a secret that could jeopardize her own position and plans. This realization awakened her resolve to act, for the stakes were high and time was playing against her. The situation demanded not only courage and determination, but also ingenuity in making the fateful decision to leave the palace, which would be the next important step in her journey. In the silence of the night enveloping the expanse of the majestic palace, Soyo pondered her escape plan. She was faced with a task that seemed almost impossible: how to find a way out of this labyrinth of luxury and power that held her in its embrace tighter than any fetters. At that moment, the thought of rice pie as a beacon of hope in a vast sea of doubt flashed through her mind. Soyo had no doubt that he, who held such a special position in the palace hierarchy and possessed knowledge that few could boast, held the key to her freedom. She was certain that he was the one who knew all the secret passageways and hidden doors that would lead her on the path to freedom. Meanwhile, in the semi-darkness of his chambers, the emperor, whose eyelids were not inclined to sleep, suddenly voiced his whim. His unwillingness to sleep was indicated by a request. He, the lord of the empire, needed a lullaby, a melody that could carry him into the arms of Morpheus. Soyo, though reluctant, obeyed his wish. Her voice, slightly shaky and uncertain, filled the room with soft sounds like a breeze playing with the curtains at the window. To her surprise, however, the emperor found the song too daring for the night hour, too free in its expression for such a strict time as that reserved for sleep. His voice, low and calm, interrupted the night's silence again, this time with a request for another song, a melody that might be appropriate for this moment, for this place, for this time. So-yu, immersed in thought, tried to find something in her mind that would satisfy the emperor's demands, that would be able to lull his might without causing the slightest displeasure. She was faced with a difficult choice. What song to respond to such an unusual request as to put to sleep the man in whose hands is concentrated power over an entire empire? At dawn, as the first rays of sunlight cautiously broke through the opulent curtains, illuminating the splendor of the imperial chambers, the Lord found himself trapped in an unexpected weariness. He discovered that the cause of his sleepless night was a tonic that had inadvertently or deliberately gotten to him. In search of answers, he turned to the eunuch, the palace's hope, whose wisdom and loyalty were invaluable. The question was as easy on the emperor's tongue as a feather blown in the wind. Why would Soyo give him such a potion? The eunuch's reply was shrouded in a fog of ambiguity. Perhaps it was a hint from Soyo, a suggestion to the emperor to put more effort into some task or endeavor unknown to him. This answer made the Lord think, plunging his thoughts into a sea of speculation about hidden meanings and possible messages. That same day, when the sun had already risen high above the horizon, filling the palace with life and warmth, Soyu found an opportunity to meet with Rice Cake. Their meeting was filled with tension, hovering in the air like the delicate scent of flowers lurking among the palace walls. So-yu, burdened with questions and doubts, did not hesitate to approach Pai with a question laden with the seriousness of the impending decision. What would she get for trying to carry out her plan, for seeking to climb over the palace walls in search of freedom? In response to her words, Rice Pie did something unexpected, breaking the usual space between them. He pulled So-yu close to him, as if trying to protect her from all the storms and hardships that might be waiting outside their golden cage. Something unspeakable gleamed in his eyes as he asked a question, piercing and extremely personal. Could he kiss her? This moment, full of tension and uncertainty, was a crossroads in their relationship, leaving only questions about the future and what other mysteries and challenges awaited them ahead. The moment Pai, filled with tender feelings, tried to get closer to So-yu, she was seized by a sudden tightness. Her reaction was immediate and decisive. She pulled away from him, replacing the moment of intimacy with a demand for rationality. With a reproach in her voice, she said that instead of wasting time kissing him, he could have done better to share a plan to escape the golden cage that was her palace. This sudden turn made Pai fall into a state of fear, for he feared that their brief rapprochement might end in a rupture. However, when he heard that Soyu intended to return, his heart was filled with relief, and he sighed, letting go of the tension that had built up. Realizing that the situation between them remained tense, Pai offered an alternative. He hoped that walking together through the shrouded city at night would help repair their relationship, and suggested that Soyo walk outside the palace walls together. However, she did not hesitate to reject his offer. With words that spoke of needing to meet a certain person, Soyu stumped Pai. Her mystery only fueled a fire of jealousy in him that was not new to him. Pai felt jealousy begin to eat away at him from the inside out. His imagination drew pictures of Soyu dating someone else, which caused him to feel a powerful surge of emotion. At that moment, he admitted to himself that he was unable to give her the freedom to have such an encounter, especially if it meant her leaving for another. He stated that he had no means of assisting her in her intention to meet this mysterious man. This moment was a point of tension for both of them, where every word and every action could lead to unpredictable consequences in their relationship. When circumstances demanded immediate and decisive action, Soyu did not hesitate to seek help from Hyukap, whose reputation and abilities were well known to her. Her arrival caused a wave of uneasiness in Hyukap, who, burdened by the thought of Soyu's possible escape from the emperor himself, could not hide his disappointment. He was stunned to learn that his assumptions were far from the truth and that Seoyo had no intention of running away for good. Her certainty that she would return awakened Hyukap's mixed feelings. Seoyo took the moment to remind Hyukap of her recent noble act of freeing Concubine Lee, which undoubtedly played in her favor. This argument proved to be decisive, and Hyukap agreed to help her, albeit reluctantly. After overcoming his inner hesitation, he devised a plan whereby Seoyo could leave the palace without attracting attention. Using a clever ruse, he passed off Soyo as part of his servants, thus ensuring her safe passage through the palace's strict guards. When they reached the busy marketplace, where everyone is busy with their own business and commerce is bustling like never before, Hyukap and Soyo parted ways, agreeing on a time to meet for the return trip. When she was alone in the midst of the crowds, Soyo immersed herself in the study of local life. A group of people dressed in clothes that made it clear they were from Murim, the land of warriors and martial artists. The discussion was about Yun Boho, whose name immediately caught Soyu's attention. Eavesdropping on their conversation, Soyu learned that Boho was in the tie-in building, which was a surprising revelation to her. This information could drastically change the course of her plan and even her fate. She was now faced with the choice of how best to deal with this revelation and how it would affect her future actions. In the maze of city streets, where fates intertwined tighter than cloth in the marketplace, Taeyeon, disguised under her new name Soyo, encountered an obstacle that could be the end of her journey. The denial of access to the building she sought was like a cold wind blowing over her suddenly. Soyu's appearance, which seemed too weak and insignificant to the guard for such a place, was the reason for her stopping. However, the fire in her heart flared brighter at the words of rejection, and she remembered her true dignity, her power, and the title of Master Nenpi. Though she realized that she could no longer call herself by her former name, the death of her old identity required complete renunciation. The guard, as if sensing her inner rebellion, offered Soyo 2 ways to overcome the obstacle: a fight where she could prove her strength in deed, or an intellectual challenge, reciting a poem. The choice was acute. Victory opened doors, while defeat promised disgrace, for the loser would be humiliated, stripped to her underwear, and walk down the street of shame, where every look would be like a whip. Soyo weighed her chances and decided on poetry. Her decision was like a leap into the unknown, because she had to create a poem on the fly, and she threw herself into the creative whirlpool. The words flowed out of her like a river after the spring melting of ice, but the result was far from a masterpiece. The poem was so awful that the guard must have been utterly bewildered for the first time in his life. His stupor became a beacon of salvation for Soyo in a sea of despair. Despite her poetic imperfection, she was able to achieve her goal. She walked past the guard, leaving him in a state of deep shock at what she had heard, and peacefully continued her way inside the building as if her unusual ordeal had been a routine ticket check at the entrance to a theater of extraordinary events. When the sky was colored with the hues of sunset heralding the approach of night, the emperor himself unexpectedly arrived at Soyo's house. His appearance was so unexpected that the maids left in the house fell into a state of slight shock and confusion. They were well aware of the importance of such a guest, but Soyo's words before she left that the emperor would not visit her this evening left them completely unprepared for his visit. In an attempt to protect their mistress, and perhaps hoping that their bold-faced lies would convince the emperor to leave, the maids respectfully but falsely informed him that Soyo had delved deeper into the realm of Morpheus. However, the internal conflict between loyalty to their mistress and deep respect for the emperor only made their excitement grow. The pressure created by the need to maintain their untruths became unbearable. Eventually, unable to bear the weight of the situation, the maids bowed in apology to the emperor, admitting their lies. The emperor, on his part, was unexpectedly calm and magnanimous. He gently stated that he would wait in Soyo's chamber, thus forgiving the maids for their attempt to mislead him. His reaction was full of grandeur and patience, showing the depth of his feelings for Soyu and his desire to see her no matter the circumstances. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Soyu had finally found the one she had been looking for all this time, Boho. While the emperor sat in her chambers awaiting her return, she was absorbed in her own quest. In this moment, their destinies were interconnected, but also separated by different goals and aspirations, creating a subtle thread of tension and anticipation in the story of their relationship. That day, Soyo was feeling much more than just the desire for a new adventure. Her actions were driven not only by a thirst for knowledge, but also by a longing to reconnect. Before heading out to meet Boho, she spotted a waitress carrying an appetizing dish. With dexterity and persistence, Soyo persuaded the waitress to give her the dish, promising that her intentions were pure and there was no villain's heart lurking in her chest. That said, Soyo added some humor to her assurance by promising that she wasn't an assassin. After bringing Boho's food, Soyu did something unexpected and quite dramatic. She smashed a plate over his head. This act caused a storm of bewilderment and outrage, to which Soyo justified herself by saying that her act was due to haste and a desire to attract attention in a most unusual way. Boho, dumbfounded yet delighted by such audacity, couldn't help but notice that there were other, less extravagant ways to strike up a dialogue in the world. Seeing that her way might indeed have been unnecessary, Soyu held out gold and jewelry to Boho as a sign of apology and peace, allowing her to finally begin the long-awaited conversation. Their conversation quickly turned to the fate of Nanpai, the girl everyone thought was dead. Soho shared with Boho a rumor that Nyongpi might have joined the Sahabi gang, which seemed unbelievable since she was thought to be dead. Nyongpi's return, seemingly out of nowhere, was wrapped in mysticism and mystery, prompting Soyo to ponder his own fate. Soyo began to question the reality of her existence, wondering if she had crossed over into Soyo's body, if anyone could have crossed over into her body. Such thoughts only strengthened her resolve to meet Qian, hoping that in that meeting she would find the answers to the questions plaguing her soul. And now, as Soyo seemed to be nearing the realization of her destiny, she was approached by the fourth prince, a mysterious and important figure whose appearance promised a new twist in her story. That moment lingered in the air, filled with anticipation and foreboding of coming events that could overturn Soyo's understanding of the world and her place in it. The moment the fourth prince entered the dialogue, the atmosphere was filled with anticipation. His words, spoken with majesty and confidence, left no doubt of his power and importance. He turned to Soyu, claiming that she had arrived with the clear purpose of asking certain questions of Boho, and ordered Boho to answer all of her questions without exception. This moment was a turning point, promising to reveal many of the secrets hovering in the air. However, Soyu, feeling the sudden weight of responsibility and realizing that certain issues could lead to undesirable consequences, decided to act unexpectedly. She asked a question seemingly unrelated to Muram's pressing problems and mysteries, about the emperor's preferences. This question, so far from the expected seriousness, caused general disappointment among those present, who might have been expecting the solution of a great mystery or an important discovery. Boho's reaction was immediate and emotional. He exclaimed that it was impossible to know the answer to such a question, emphasizing the absurdity of the situation. Soyu, sensing the heightened atmosphere and perhaps realizing the inappropriateness of her question, hurriedly left the meeting place, leaving behind only questions and bewilderment. When she returned home, Soyu found that fate had a new twist in store for her. Her home was no longer a haven of solitude, for the emperor himself was there. The emperor, wasting no time, immediately addressed a question to Soyu regarding her recent walk. This question, full of hidden meaning and perhaps secret knowledge, made Soyo once again feel the fullness of the surprises that life continued to bring her. In a secluded room of the palace, a dialogue filled with emotions and difficult questions unfolded between Soyo and the emperor. This conversation, soaked with the gravity of the moment and hidden feelings, reached its climax when the emperor, as a sign of sincerity and perhaps forgiveness, embraced Soyo, creating a fleeting oasis of understanding in the desert of their mutual misunderstandings. As he said goodbye, he left her words that sounded like echoes of his unchanging destiny, marked by duties and constraints beyond his heart. Unlike her, he was not free to come and go at his own whim. His footsteps receding in the palace corridor were heavy with the realization that it was not only the difference in their abilities that stood between them, but also an untold feeling that both tried to ignore. Soyo, absorbed in thinking about what had happened, was soon confronted with a reality that forced her to take a fresh look at her actions and their effect on the emperor. Learning that he had waited 6 hours for her return, she was struck by this gesture of patience and waiting, which revealed to her the depth of his resentment and yet concern for her. This revelation filled her heart with a mixture of guilt and gratitude, prompting her to decide to take a step that had previously seemed impossible, to apologize to the emperor. However, when Soyu, determined to rectify the situation, headed to the emperor, she was confronted with a completely different picture. His intimacy with his concubine had struck a chord with her, causing a wave of jealousy that was as unexpected as it was painful. This moment, like a shot from a movie where the main character discovers the cheating, stirred her emotions, turning her previous feelings of guilt and understanding into anger and frustration. Returning home brought her no comfort. On the contrary, she felt she was in the midst of an emotional hurricane that was only gaining strength. At a moment like this, when it seems like the whole world is against you, a ray of light suddenly appears in Wanun's face. Her question about what Soyo would give the fourth prince for his birthday was so unexpected and far removed from Soyo's current worries that it stopped the whirlwind of her thoughts for a moment. This question not only introduced variety into the kaleidoscope of her emotions, but also provided an opportunity to look at the situation from a different angle, offering a path to a possible reconciliation with her own feelings and actions. Finding herself stranded without a single coin in her pocket, Soyo realized that all of her cash had been used up on an expensive purchase of information from Boho, a person who held secrets that could change her fate. At this critical moment, Wanun, like a messenger of unexpected solutions, suggested that they seek help from Youngbi, Soyu's older sister. An option that in any other situation would have seemed a lifeline, in their case was rejected immediately. Soyu, whose life had recently teetered on the brink of death not once but twice, and who had not encountered even minimal concern or interest in her well-being from Youngbi, decided that such a request would only add pain and humiliation to their relationship. Faced with the impossibility of finding a financial solution to her dilemma, Soyo, armed with honesty and straightforwardness, decided to open her cards to the fourth prince, explaining to him her current penniless state. Her confession was met with understanding, which only emphasized the depth of their bond and mutual respect. In spite of his sympathy with her position, however, the prince still expressed a desire for a gift that would require no expense but would be priceless in its own right. His demand was for Soyo to share information with him about what she was really looking for from Boho, what was hidden behind the curtain of secrets and political intrigue. This request from the prince not only put Soyo in a choice between keeping her secrets and wanting to please him, but also made it clear that their relationship was built on trust and understanding that transcended material possessions. So, in the heart of palace intrigue and secrets, unfolded the story of how trust and openness became the most precious gifts, two hearts trying to find common ground in a world where every word and gesture carried weight. The prince, whose face rarely gave away his true emotions, shared his thoughts on the enigmatic Boho, a mysterious man as if shrouded in a shroud of secrets. He noted that although Boho himself remained silent, like an ancient keeper of forgotten secrets, he, the prince, would be glad to hear a story from Soyo, even if the gift she had to give was only wild flowers plucked by the side of a forgotten path. But Soyu, like a deer alarmed by an unexpected noise, only ran away abruptly to ask Youngbi for help, hoping for her favor and generosity. As she approached Youngbi, Soyu felt excitement mixed with genuine amazement. Before her, stood none other than the very concubine whose beauty and grace had mesmerized the eyes, and whose walks with the emperor himself were wrapped in a halo of mystery and jealousy. It was like meeting a living legend, a character from folk tales come true. When the conversation between Soyo and Youngbi finally began, it quickly moved from trivialities to things more substantial and profound. Youngbi, like a witch who could see into the deepest depths of her soul, nonchalantly stated that Soyu was too direct in her emotions, that she was like an open book that anyone could look into. And what is more, Youngbi expressed a thought that could call into question the very basis of the existence of court intrigues and love affairs. She called the emperor nothing but a thing, an object incapable of reciprocal feelings, in which one should not, or rather should not, fall in love. It was like a cold shower for Soyo, awakening her from her dreams and drawing her to the harsh reality where feelings and passions must give way to calculation and reason. Ignoring Youngbi's profoundly thoughtful remarks, Soyu got to the point of her visit with the directness that characterized her, asking for monetary assistance succinctly and without embellishment. Her request caused Youngbi to laugh merrily at first, as if she had forgotten the seriousness of the situation for a moment. But then, like a cloud covering the sun, her expression changed. With a seriousness that would not tolerate objection, Youngbi suddenly ordered Soyo to borrow money directly from the emperor, putting deep meaning and perhaps a hidden threat into those words. It was at this moment that the atmosphere of tense conversation was cut by the arrival of their younger sister, Wu Yo, whose appearance filled the room with the lightness and carefree nature of youth. Soyo, in an attempt to lighten the mood, jokingly suggested that the three of them together might make it seem as if Soyo was a half-sister to the others. However, Youngbi, with unexpected seriousness and without a shadow of a smile, shocked Seoyo by revealing to her the truth that Wu Yo is really their half-sister. This statement sounded like a thunderclap to Soyo, leaving her confused and distraught at the unexpected and unpredictable nature of their family's relationship. Meanwhile, in the palace, where destinies are interwoven by the finest and most unpredictable threads, the emperor received a report which instantly aroused his indignation. The news that Soyo had been spotted in the capital in the company of the fourth prince struck him like a lightning strike. A fire of jealousy and indignation flared in his heart at the thought that Soyo, the object of his ambivalent feelings, might have preferred to meet another man. Under the power of an outburst of anger and resentment, the emperor did what he rarely does. He changed his clothes to leave the chambers unnoticed, driven not only by the desire to deal with the situation, but also by the need for immediate action. His resolve was unwavering and his purpose clear. As soon as the sun hid behind the horizon, coloring the sky in the dark shades of evening, a quiet drama unfolded in the imperial palace, the origins of which went deep into the heart of the empire. The emperor's heart was gripped with anxiety and suspicion. He learned that his meeting with Soyu had been ignored not for a simple reason, but because of their mysterious encounter, which could conceal much more behind it than met the eye. In the back of his mind, the emperor could not rid himself of the thought that a conspiracy was brewing against him. His imagination painted a picture of treachery and intrigue woven in the shadows of the palace walls. At this moment, Counselor Gongwu, a man whose wisdom and loyalty to the crown were undeniable, entered the stage. His words were like balm to the emperor's troubled soul. With unwavering calmness, Gongwu allayed his master's fears, arguing that the Qian family had nothing to counter the emperor's might. He recalled that their resources and influence could not rival the power of the throne, and so the possibility of a conspiracy seemed unlikely. Nevertheless, even during this soothing dialogue, the emperor could not completely free himself from doubt. He shared with Gongwu his concerns about feelings, which can sometimes blind even the most discerning minds. As an example, he cited the story of his intelligent sister who once let her feelings cloud her mind. This story was not just a cautionary tale, but a reminder that even in the highest echelons of power, the heart can be a weak spot through which foes can strike. The emperor expressed his concern about Soyo, fearing that she might use her influence to deceive him, just as others might have deceived his kin. That evening in the imperial palace was filled with heavy meditations and quiet conversations where every word could have the weight of fate. Tension was in the air, foreshadowing the coming trials that would shake the foundations of the empire. The emperor and his trusted advisor exchanged opinions and concerns, trying to penetrate through the fog of intrigue and treachery to see the true path for the state and its people. As dusk enveloped the land with its soft blanket in a world where fates are intertwined by the thin threads of conspiracy and loyalty, Soyo and Rice Cake finally found an opportunity for their meeting. This meeting was long awaited, filled with a thin thread of excitement and anticipation. Soyu, with a glint of genuine curiosity in her eyes, approached Rice Cake with a question that could easily confuse anyone, especially when it came to feelings and rivalry. She wanted to know what the fourth prince might like, to which Rice Cake, seized with jealousy, replied that he had no intention of sharing such information. Soyu, unfazed and determined, said that she couldn't afford to ignore the prince's birthday, for her reputation would suffer. Rice Cake, remembering last year's gift from Youngbi, which consisted of a song and dance, shared this information with Soyo. This inspired her to follow Youngbi's example by deciding to present her own dance. The moment Soyu asked for his sword to demonstrate the dance, tension hung in the air as if before a storm. Her dance, like the embodiment of the wind, light and unpredictable, brought with it an overwhelming delight. She moved with such grace and passion that even Rice Cake himself, involuntarily dazed with delight, found the strength to declare that the dance was terrible. This was only said to hide his true sense of admiration and his desire to keep this beauty only for himself, not wanting to share it with anyone else. That evening, as the stars lavished their brilliance on the sky, Soyu, despite Rice Pie's stern review of her dance, felt no resentment. Her confidence in her own art was unshakable. With a slight chuckle, she grabbed his cheeks affectionately, as if testing his foresight, and jokingly remarked that perhaps his problem was his eyesight, not her dancing prowess. However, when night caught up with Soyu again in the Emperor's chambers, the atmosphere was far from as light and carefree. The Emperor, laden with dark clouds of anger, met her with words that sounded like thunder. He, with unyielding determination, declared that Soyo was forbidden to dance in front of other men and that she should pick another gift for the fourth prince. Soyu, alarmed and angered by this sudden and strict decree, could not let this go unchallenged. She recalled Youngbi giving the prince a dance, but the Emperor, like a stone wall resisting the waves, insisted, explaining that the new prohibition came into effect from now on, and she could only dance in front of him alone. Soyu, whose heart was filled with bitterness and incomprehension, rejected the order. The images of the Emperor walking with Youngbi came to her mind, which only made her more determined to resist. The Emperor, as if reading into her silent protest, realized the depth of her feelings and the reasons for her frustration. However, unable to find words of comfort or explanation, he simply reaffirmed his ban on dancing, leaving a chasm of misunderstanding and unspoken resentment between them. Under the arches of the luxurious hall, where the air was saturated with the aromas of exotic flowers and expensive incense, the feast began, which everyone was looking forward to. Guests gathered around, creating a lively atmosphere when it was announced that it was time to present gifts to the prince according to a long and honorable tradition. All eyes were fixed on the center of events, where the prince was majestically awaiting gifts from his subjects. The emperor standing nearby could not hide his excitement. His gaze was fixed on Soyu, who was waiting for her moment with nobility and mysterious grace. The emperor's heart pounded in anticipation of how Soyo would handle the ban on dancing for the prince that he himself had imposed on her. Suddenly, the prince, gathering the gazes of the feast participants around him, beckoned Soyo over to him. The gesture was intentional, drawing the attention of everyone present to her. Soyo, realizing the gravity of the moment and aware of the ban placed upon her, stepped forward. Everyone froze in anticipation, but instead of the traditional dance or material gift, she gave the prince something unusual, a solemn promise. The gesture elicited laughter and humiliation from some of those present who thought the gift too insignificant or odd for such a solemn occasion. The prince, however, grasped the true value of the promise and smiled broadly. His joy was undoubted, for he knew better than anyone else the value of the promise given to him and how wisely he could use it. It was at this point that Hugh, a man known for his wisdom and respect in the community, became involved in the situation. He walked over to express his admiration for Soyo's gift, emphasizing its sincerity and loyalty. Hugh not only appreciated the gift, but added that the emperor's mother also considered it the best gift of today, which gave Hugh's words weight and significance. This moment was the culmination of the festivities, turning out to be not only a demonstration of respect for tradition and the prince, but also emphasizing the depth of the relationship and loyalty between the characters. In every movement, in every word, there was a true story of trust, respect, and loyalty, which were the main characters of this solemn evening. In the depths of the imperial palace, where intrigue and secret conspiracies intertwined with everyday affairs as tightly as silk threads in the fabrics laid over the shoulders of the aristocracy, a new chapter was unfolding. The Empress, ruler of that world where her word could be both a blessing and a curse, had ordered her concubines to prepare a dish for the former Empress, paying homage and perhaps seeking to solidify her position among the other ladies of the court. Each of the concubines was obliged to obey, but the Empress paid special attention to Soyo, a girl whose presence at court was shrouded in rumors and speculation. Perhaps it was because Soyo had already demonstrated her ability to turn even the most innocent situations in her favor that the Empress decided to limit her choices by ordering her to prepare rice cakes with plum blossoms. This dish, while seemingly simple, required a special attention to detail and skill to truly bring out its flavor and beauty, making the task very symbolic. Assigning Soyu to prepare just such a dish was probably not a random choice by the Empress. She was eager to test Soyo, to put her within certain limits, perhaps wanting to see if the girl could exceed expectations without being able to dodge or use her tricks as she had with the solemn promise. When Rice Cake became the object of her wrath for telling the emperor about the dance, not only political intrigue but also personal grudges surfaced. Clearly, Rice Cake and Soyo shared a complex, multifaceted relationship where trust and betrayal went hand in hand. The accusation of betrayal thrown in Rice Pie's face was like a low blow, especially when personal insults and misunderstandings came into play. Interestingly, Rice Cake was shocked not so much by the accusation of betrayal, but by Soyu's misperception of his physical condition, for she had called him a eunuch. This moment reveals to the reader not only the dynamics between the characters, but also shows how easily misunderstandings can arise based on assumptions and rumors. Soyo's remark that this is not the time for such arguments emphasizes how complex and confusing relationships and priorities can be in the imperial court, where every word and every act can have far-reaching consequences. In this story, no character is simply good or bad. Everyone acts according to their beliefs, fears, and desires, which makes the story not only engaging, but also makes you wonder about the motives and consequences of their actions. In one of the bright corners of the world, where stories are woven from the sighs of the wind and the whispers of the leaves, Soyo expressed her intention to find a new soulmate, a new friend who could take Rice Krispie Treat's place in her heart. Her choice fell on Haikap, a character whose nature was like a magnolia tree in full bloom, majestic and beautiful. In her choice, she saw a striking difference from Rice Pie, which she had initially compared to bristlecone, a plant simple and unremarkable, but then reconsidered her opinion, lowering its status to weed, symbolizing its unimportance and irrelevance in her life at the time. Rice Pie, puzzled and genuinely wanting to make things right, asked Soyo how he could redeem himself, what actions could help him regain his former favor in her eyes. Soyo, contemplating the possibility of repairing their relationship, made an unusual yet symbolic demand of him. She asked him for a recipe for rice cakes, but not plain ones, but ones decorated with plum blossoms, a delicacy worthy of the greatest and most honored guests. Her intent was clear: to present these cakes to the emperor's mother, an act symbolizing peace and reconciliation and emphasizing the significance of their relationship. Rice Pie, realizing the depth of the gesture and the importance of the moment, agreed to help without hesitation. He realized that this was his chance not only to redeem himself, but also to regain his place in Soyu's life. Pie's agreement was the first step toward repairing their relationship, a symbol of a willingness to compromise and put effort into the relationship. It didn't take long before Soyo found herself in front of the emperor's own cook, a move made possible by her determination and the help of Rice Pie. This moment was not only a test for their relationship, but also an opportunity for Soyo to demonstrate her courage, determination, and ability to pursue her goals, even if it requires going to the highest echelons of power. It was a moment when history seemed to stand still, waiting to see what would happen next. For it was on these rice cakes with plum blossoms that much now depended, not only the fate of their relationship with Rice Pie, but also the opportunity to join the circle of the most influential personalities in the empire. At the moment when the air was filled with the aroma of the upcoming culinary mastery, and the question of the second participant of this action was hanging in the air, Rice Pie walked by. It was as if his sudden appearance was a signal of fate, confirming his unalterable role in this amazing chapter of their lives. In front of the chef, the master of the emperor's own culinary wonders, Soyu, perhaps in an attempt to make the situation official or simply to play along with the circumstances, decided to call the rice cake tokpail, a name that sounded dignified and mysterious, befitting the moment. However, the cook, a man whose hands had created culinary masterpieces worthy of the empire's highest dignitaries, was in for a real shock when his gaze fell on the face of the man Soyo had named Tokpale. There was more than surprise in that gaze. It was the embodiment of bewilderment and excitement, for before him stood none other than the emperor himself. As he began his instruction in the art of making patties, the cook, overwhelmed by the sudden excitement that swept over him at the sight of Tokpale, endeavored to show and explain all the intricacies and secrets, despite his condition. Soyu, unaware of Tokpale's true identity and assuming that her status as the emperor's favorite concubine was making the cook nervous, nonchalantly offered Tokpale the task of chopping vegetables. This sentence struck the cook's calmness like lightning, throwing him into even more stress, for the notion that the emperor himself would perform such mundane tasks was unimaginable to him. In his quest to maintain professionalism and order in the cooking studio, the chef took the drastic step of announcing that he would teach exclusively to Soyo, excluding Tokpal from the process. In response, Soyo, continuing to act on her lack of understanding of the exceptionality of the situation, suggested that Tokpala take over doing the dishes. This suggestion was the last straw for the cook, who, unable to bear the strain, stopped her and began to wash the dishes himself, trying to preserve some dignity in this difficult situation. Thus, in this whirlwind of events, where every act and every word inadvertently influenced the course of action, not only the complexity of interpersonal relationships was revealed, but also the depth of the influence of status on the behavior of others, even in such seemingly simple and everyday moments as learning to make pies. It was a special day in the palace court, a day for concubines to show off their cooking skills in an effort to win the favor of the empire's most powerful figures. The air was filled with the aromas of exotic spices and subtle notes of fresh herbs, mingling with the slight tension that hovered over the golden roofs of the palace. The concubines, anxious, hustled the cooks and whispered among themselves, glancing toward the majestic figure of the emperor's mother, whose approval could change their fate. The emperor's mother, a woman with an unyielding gaze and an aura of unattainable power, slowly walked past the tables of dishes, her presence adding pressure to the already tense atmosphere. At that moment, her gaze happened to fall on Soyo, a concubine with a delicate appearance, but it wasn't so much Soyu that caught her attention as the strange figure lurking behind the tree, the Tokpal who had unwittingly caused the scandal. His unexpected presence broke the idyll of the moment, causing the emperor's mother to react violently. She choked, and her shock instantly attracted everyone's attention. In a split second, the concubines froze in anticipation of unpredictable consequences, while the empress, mistakenly believing that the cause of the ailment was one of the dishes, began to search for the culprit of the incident. Soyu's heart beat an anxious rhythm as the emperor's mother approached her, asking an innocent question about Tokpala, who vanished into thin air like a ghost, leaping over the palace fence. The situation escalated to the extreme when the emperor's mother, acting with unexpected determination, ordered everyone, including the empress herself, to leave the scene. Left alone with Soyo, she sought to unravel the mystery of the unusual guest, intent on discovering how the figure whose appearance had provoked such a violent reaction was related to the concubine. In that moment, filled with excitement and anticipation of clues, the palace was enveloped in a silence that foreshadowed the coming changes in the life of Soyo and perhaps the entire imperial house. Before talking about Tokpal, Soyu, choosing her words carefully, decided to make sure that the emperor's mother was aware of Tokpal's deepest secret. She felt it was not in her rights to divulge such secrets without the assurance of her interlocutor's understanding and acceptance. When she heard the confirmation, her tension eased a little and she exhaled in relief, glad for the opportunity to keep her friend's trust and not betray his expectations. With great trepidation, Soyu lifted the veil on the sensitive topic, cautiously hinting that Tokpal was embarrassed about his position as a eunuch. The emperor's mother, perceiving Soyo's words, could not hide her surprise and laughed, realizing how wrongly Soyo had interpreted the situation. This laughter diffused the situation, showing that the misunderstanding between them was not as deep as it might have seemed at first glance. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, an equally tense scene was unfolding. Soinhok, a close advisor to the emperor, reminded the ruler to accept the empress. He specified whether the emperor would prefer a personal meeting or would choose to confine himself to sending gifts, as is sometimes customary in high circles to maintain formality. The emperor, smiling in response, emphasized his commitment to tradition and respect for the empress, recalling that he had never missed an opportunity to meet her in person. His smile concealed a deep affection for his wife, for it was moments of delicate attention and tradition like this that strengthened their bond, despite all the court intrigue and complications. In the evening, when the palace was already enveloped in the calm of the coming night, and the stars began to light up in the sky, creating an atmosphere of mystery and anticipation, the emperor went to the apartments of his wife. The gesture was full of significance, confirming the continuity and depth of the relationship between them, remaining an important ritual that connected the hearts of the two lords of the empire, in a world where every action and word carried weight. In the silence of her chambers, amidst the richly decorated walls and exquisite furniture, the empress felt a wave of sadness enveloping her heart like a shroud. Her thoughts drifted back to the last few days, filled with change and uncertainty that brought her grief. The attention and affection of her loved ones had once been directed solely toward her, but now everything had changed, and they were drawn to Soyo, a new figure in their circle. It made her heart grow anxious at the thought that Soyo might take her place, the place she valued most. In the midst of these reflections, the empress, burdened with fear and doubt, suddenly addressed the emperor with a question that had long been brewing in her heart. She asked him who he was really dating, her, the empress, his lawful wedded wife, or was it just his double hiding behind a mask of care and attention? The emperor's answer was unexpected. His smile, easy and casual, seemed to play on her doubts as he turned the conversation to her wants and needs, avoiding a direct answer to her agonizing question. The next morning, the sun had barely had time to rise before the emperor met with his mother, a woman of authority and determination whose opinion always carried weight in the imperial palace. She bluntly expressed her opinion on the current state of affairs within the palace. With unwavering confidence, she declared that it was time for the emperor to expand his harem with new concubines, given that none of the current ones had yet been able to give him an heir. However, the emperor, unwavering in his feelings and decisions, proposed an alternative plan. He said that instead of seeking new concubines, he would simply raise Soyu's status by giving her a more prominent role in the court hierarchy. This statement was met with skepticism from his mother. She couldn't understand how Soyu, whom she thought was too unintelligent and dumb for such an important role, could handle the increased attention and responsibilities. As an example, she mentioned a recent incident where she deliberately praised Soyu's cooking skills in front of the other concubines in an effort to boost her reputation and show her in a better light. The move, though calculated to improve relations within the palace, carried the risk of causing resentment and jealousy among the other concubines, which could lead to unexpected and possibly undesirable consequences. The emperor's mother, despite her initial criticism and doubts about Soyo, eventually admitted that she personally liked Soyo. She saw in her not only potential, but a sincerity that made Soyo special among the other concubines. However, the main concern was how Soyo's elevated status would be perceived by the other concubines. The emperor's mother feared that envy and hatred could undermine the tranquility and harmony within the palace. Therefore, she proposed two possible solutions to strengthen Soyo's position. Either Soyo's family should make significant contributions to the country, which would strengthen her position through external achievements. Either Soyo herself should get pregnant by the emperor, which would give her irrefutable status and rights within the palace. Meanwhile, that night, Soyo was in the imperial chambers, snugly wrapped in blankets in a wide bed that symbolized her closeness to the emperor despite all the complexities and intrigues of palace life. Suddenly, the emperor, perhaps trying to establish a lighter and more playful atmosphere between them, asked if she was hot under so many layers of blankets. Soyo's response was bold and direct. She stated that it was indeed hot and suggested that the emperor experienced such torment himself. This exchange of remarks brought the emperor, perhaps for the first time with some lightness in his voice, to ask if he could help her and unfold from the blankets to ease her discomfort. The question, asked with such casualness and care, caught Soyo off guard and caused her embarrassment. This moment became not only a symbol of their personal interaction, but also reflected the complexity of their relationship, where every gesture and word could have multiple meanings and implications in the context of palace intrigue and power struggles. As the emperor slowly pulled down the blanket, the tension in the air was palpable. Soyu, who found herself in a position of anticipation and uncertainty, had a mixture of feelings. However, when the emperor abruptly exposed her, she found herself on the verge of expressing her emotions, exactly until he stopped. The emperor stated that she did not fit into his ideas of intimacy, as he was used to seeing her more as a sleep companion than as a lover. This admission was unexpected and could cause Soyu to be even more confused about her position and future at court. The next morning, while pondering his relationship with Seoyo and how they can fulfill the imperial family's wish for an heir, the emperor is confronted with Seunhok's suggestion that he meet with Seoyo. However, his own doubts about which of his hypostases to present before Soyo reflect his internal conflict and search for identity. Emperor wonders which side of him is more genuine, the one that seeks to maintain a professional and distanced relationship, or the one that seeks a deeper and more personal connection. This dilemma emphasizes the difficulties the characters face in their quest to find true happiness and fulfillment in a life constrained by palace rules and expectations. As the emperor reflects on his true identity and how it affects his relationship with Soyo, he also faces pressures from the responsibilities of his position and the desires of his family. That year, as always, the annual gift from the majestic Emperor Nokbong arrived, sparking lively conversations and speculation among the palace's inhabitants as to what might lurk inside the mysterious packages. There was a heated argument among the maids about the preferences of their mistress, Soyo, who was known to have a weakness for shiny coins and gold. They whispered quietly among themselves, glancing furtively at Soyo, and made remarks about how her wealth would diminish if the number of concubines increased. At that moment, it seemed that with every word the maid said, Soyu's dreams of further increasing the treasure dissipated like smoke. The words about the possible diminution of her wealth caused her to take a deep breath of disappointment, which did not go unnoticed among the servants. However, palace life doesn't stand still, and shortly after this incident, Soyo met her consummate friend, Rice Pie. This young man, so called for his gentle soul and hearty kindness, had long ago won the favor of Soyo by his repeated acts of kindness in her favor. To express her boundless gratitude and deep respect for Rice Pie, Soyu gave him a ring of exquisite workmanship, glittering like stars in the night sky. Pie, whose gaze reflected a storm of emotions from happiness to awe, could barely hide his feelings as he affectionately touched the gift as if it were the most precious treasure. At that moment, when the air was saturated with warmth and tenderness, Soyu, immersed in thought, asked a question that made Pie wince in surprise. With tenderness and awe in her voice, she asked if there was a special place in his heart for herself. He, finding himself confused by such a direct question, tried to steer the conversation in another direction by asking how Soyo would feel about his real name being exposed if it was a name she didn't like. Soyo's answer was full of confidence and sincerity. She assured him that she would accept him with any secret he could hide, emphasizing her words with a caustic smile, as if playing with his expectations and fears. This moment was a testament not only to their deep connection, but also to the unwavering trust that Soyo was willing to give to Rice Pie, regardless of the secrets behind his mask. After Soyu confidently declared that she had long ago solved the mystery behind Rice Pie's identity, the air around her seemed to freeze in anticipation. Pie, caught off guard by this revelation, could not hide his excitement and mixed feelings. His surprise turned to bewilderment when he asked why, knowing the truth, Soyo continued to treat him so harshly and peremptorily. Soyu's answer was simple and honest. She admitted that she really didn't care who he was because her attitude towards him was not based on his status or the secret he kept, but on their personal relationship and the memories they shared. This moment was a turning point in their dialogue, and Pai, in an attempt to ease the tension and bring playfulness to the conversation, suggested that Soyo make a wager of desire. The point of the argument was for Soyo to voice her guess as to his true identity, and if after a week their versions matched, Soyo would be considered the winner. The fourth prince, known for his shrewdness and foresight, asked the emperor a question regarding Soyo and her knowledge of what exactly he was hiding behind the mask of Rice Pie. This question made the emperor think, for he was beginning to realize that the game of disguise could lead to unpredictable consequences. though the emperor tried to distract himself from this conversation by pondering what wish he might make if he won the argument. Deep in his heart, he realized that the game he had started might reveal more than he expected and change their relationship forever. Soyo stood on the cusp of a great victory in her argument, pondering a cunning move that would take Pai by surprise. In the back of her mind, she toyed with the idea of his secret, which she thought would soon be unraveled. But a shadow of doubt slowly crept into her confidence. What if she was wrong? What if Pai's riddle remained unsolved, lurking somewhere in the depths of his mysterious personality, like a lost treasure trove guarded by a dragon? And so, standing on the edge of these reflections, the fourth prince approached her as if sent by fate itself. Seoyo, seizing the opportunity to get a clue from fate, did not miss the chance and decided to address the prince with the question that worried her most. Did he know someone in the emperor's guard who would be especially close to the emperor himself? The reaction of the prince, who nonchalantly mentioned rice cake, took Soyu by surprise. Her surprise was reflected on her face like moonlight in a quiet lake. The prince, possessing the look of a man who holds the keys to many secrets, quietly declared that Pai was not just anyone out there, but his friend. This revelation shook Soyo's world, adding new colors to her palette of guesses and assumptions. With the ease that only truly great men have, the prince admitted that he knew about the dispute between Soyo and Pai, and offered a deal that could change the course of history. He would reveal to her the truth about Pai's mysterious identity, but in return he wanted to hear what speculations were swirling around in Soyo's head. This moment was a turning point. The choice between the desire to win and the risk of revealing his boldest hypotheses was in the balance. Soyo felt the shadows of intrigue thicken around her. Every word, every glance concealed a double bottom, and every move could lead to either triumph or downfall. There was little time to think in this game, and every choice could be decisive. When Soyu, filled with courage and confidence, voiced her guess that Pai could have been a eunuch, the air around her seemed to freeze as if waiting for the prince's reaction. Her words, sounding so resolute and confident, caused a real explosion of emotions. The prince, who had not expected such a turn, could not hold back his laughter. His loud laugh cut through the tension in the air like a sharp blade, and it confirmed her hunch was correct. At that moment, Soyo felt a surge of pride and satisfaction, for her keen mind and attention to detail had led her to this discovery. The day of the argument had arrived. Hovering in anticipation and expectation, Soyo was determined and confident that she was right. Seonhak, taking the position of second, symbolized the beginning of their duel of wits. Seonghak's timing was like a metronome counting down the moments to the solution. And when he said 3, Pai made the revelation that was to be the final chord of their fight. He confessed that he was the emperor. This confession struck Soyo like a bolt of lightning, leaving her in complete shock. All her beliefs and hunches crumbled under the weight of this incredible truth. Not believing her ears, Soyu felt a chill run through her body. How could the man she thought was a eunuch be none other than the emperor himself? This moment was a test of her perception of reality when the unbelievable comes true. The emperor, for his part, was taken aback by her audacious assumption. His question as to how she could have come up with such an idea sounded like an accusation, inflaming the atmosphere between them. His annoyance at such a guess was obvious, adding a note of tension to the story. This exchange between Soyo and the emperor was a test for both of them, where every word was weighed and had weight, and every silence was full of unspoken words and emotions. At this moment, as if in the arena of an ancient theater, a drama was being played out in which each character was searching for his or her truth. The moment the emperor invited Soyu to ask questions, the atmosphere between them seemed saturated with excitement and unpredictability. Soyu, discouraged by the whole situation and coming face to face with a man so far from her initial assumptions, decided to question how he hides his handsome face behind a veil. The question was not so much out of curiosity as it was out of a desire to continue a conversation that had become a sort of bridge for her between her world and the emperor's. When the emperor, perhaps in jest or wanting to demonstrate trust, decides to show his face up close, Soyo, suddenly gripped by panic and an unconscious desire to protect herself, reacts instinctively. Her action, poking her in the eye, was so unexpected that it certainly could have tensed the moment. The realization of her act and who was in front of her came to Soyu suddenly, making her feel a wave of shame and embarrassment. The apology that followed her act was so sincere and pure-hearted that the emperor could not help but respond with kindness. His offer to continue to call him rice pie in privacy was not only a sign of his generosity, but a testament to the special kind of trust and intimacy that was beginning to form between them. The denouement of their meeting when the emperor suddenly announced that Soyo had lost the bet. Suddenly, the emperor kissed her, and Soyo was in complete surprise, not even thinking that Pai would decide to take advantage of the desire just like that. This act was so unpredictable and outside the normal interactions between the emperor and his subject that it could only add spice to their relationship. The kiss was undoubtedly the moment that turned their relationship upside down, bringing an element of personal intimacy that had previously seemed impossible. This gesture on the emperor's part not only confirmed his unconventional approach to relationships with others, but also raised a new set of questions for Soyo about what would develop between them next. The grand hall of the imperial palace was filled with lively whispers and the rustling of silk robes as the emperor, the greatest ruler, busied himself with selecting new concubines. Among those gathered, in the shadow of the magnificent columns, stood Soyo, one of the high-ranking women of the court, whose heart was filled with irritation at every glance sent in the direction of the young beauties. However, it was not only envy or resentment that made her heart beat faster. Among the glittering array of concubines, she noticed one girl whose appearance was strikingly identical to her own. She felt a mixture of dislike and bewilderment as to why, among all the girls, she was looking at this doppelganger. Not wanting to torture herself any longer with the sight of the girl as if she were a mirror image of herself, Soyo left the hall. The cool air of the outer courtyard calmed her frayed nerves a little, but deep inside smoldered a spark of vengeance, a desire to somehow avenge the unpleasant feelings that hovered in her heart. Suddenly her gaze fell on a carriage decorated with exquisite carvings and golden lines standing nearby. It was the carriage of the girl who was Soyu's double. In a spur-of-the-moment decision, and wanting to add a drop of annoyance to her unpleasant rival's life, Soyo walked over to the carriage and broke the wheels with force, imagining how this act of small revenge would give her a modicum of satisfaction. However, her actions did not go unnoticed. Amid the shadows and torchlight of the palace guards, she heard the figures of men who seemed to turn their attention to her. Soyo's heart thumped in a frantic rhythm, and without wasting a second she fled, covering her face from any possible witnesses to her misdeed. Her legs carried her faster than ever, but fate had decided to do its part in this story. At the most unexpected moment, when Soyu's thoughts were filled only with the desire to escape, she ran into someone in complete darkness. After recovering from the initial shock, she realized that her clumsy run had led her straight to the fourth prince, one of the most powerful and respected men in the empire. Soyo's heart, which had already experienced so much excitement today, froze in anticipation of the new challenge fate had presented her with. In the patterned halls of the palace, where every rustle and sigh echoed in the endless corridors, there was a misunderstanding that turned into a true drama for one of its inhabitants. The prince, whose thoughts and actions were directed toward the good and tranquility of the palace, witnessed a fleeting moment that touched him deeply and triggered a series of unexpected events. He saw Soyo, one of the residents of the palace, running past, her eyes full of tears. He saw Soyo, one of the palace dwellers, running past, her eyes full of tears, and the thought crept into his heart that the cause of the girl's distress was the emperor's actions in selecting new concubines. This sight so excited the prince that he hastened to share his observations and conclusions with the emperor himself, without attempting to ascertain the truth of his conjectures. The meeting with the emperor was filled with excitement and genuine concern. The prince, overwhelmed with compassion, described how he felt that Soyo was suffering and weeping because of the emperor's decisions regarding the choice of concubines. He begged the emperor to intervene and somehow comfort the girl, believing that such attention could help Soyo find peace of mind. The emperor, inspired by the prince's story and his apparent concern for the girl's feelings, decided to meet with Soyo. When the moment came, the girl felt a sense of excitement that was mixed with fear. She feared that the cause of the emperor's anxiety was her recent misconduct, the incident with the broken carriage, which she had so hoped to hide from everyone. However, instead of the expected censure or punishment, the emperor began the conversation by mentioning the prince's words, without immediately revealing what exactly he had been informed of. This moment was a turning point in their relationship, introducing an element of uncertainty and tension into an air that was already saturated with many emotions and assumptions. So, in the shadow of the majestic halls and under the vaults of the ancient palace, a story unfolded, filled with misunderstanding, sincere concern, and hidden fears, where every act and word could change the fate of not only one person, but the entire imperial house. At the very moment when the tension in the air became almost palpable, Soyu gathered her courage and turned to the emperor with the confidence that she could clear up the whole situation. But the emperor, whose greatness was tempered by his understanding and sympathy, stopped her before she even began. He calmly expressed his view of the situation, emphasizing that he understood her feelings, and even went so far as to state that jealousy of other concubines was normal. Those words made Soyo laugh, an unexpected burst of emotion that diffused the situation for a moment. In her laughter, she expressed the thought, mysterious and full of irony, that it would be all right if someone lost a leg. This comment left an awkward silence in the air, as if there was a pause at the heart of the conversation, disrupting its rhythm. The emperor, whose facial features reflected a mixture of surprise and bewilderment, gently and with a hint of curiosity, asked a question concerning the very essence of that remark, whether Soyu had actually broken someone's leg. The question, asked with such unexpected directness, emphasized the deep bond that was forming between them at that moment, a bond in which power and subjection gave way for a moment to humanity and understanding. Thus, within the confines of a secluded room where every element of the decor witnessed their unusual dialogue, a scene unfolded, filled with subtle humor, unexpected revelations, and reluctance to delve into the possible causes of the conflict. Instead, both chose the path of understanding and acceptance, which undoubtedly added new facets to their relationship, making it even more unpredictable and exciting.